I am more attracted to dogs.
Fandoms can have good and the most disturbing people ever. In this video, we'll take a look at the worst of the worst, starting with the furry community, which is a group of people who dress up as animals. Hypnotist Sappho, also known as Valerie, was a 21-year-old, relatively small content creator in the furry community. In the summer of 2021, she started her journey by getting into VR chat and doing hypnosis sessions. They would range from big group sessions to get everybody to relax,
A nice, relaxing, anxiety-free kind of triggers,
which were safe for work, to not so safe for work solo sessions. She would then take the safe for work sessions and upload them on her YouTube channel, and she built a small following by doing exactly that. That is everything you were able to see from the outside. While she seemed like a wholesome person trying to help people in VR chat, she actually was a pretty disturbing individual. Sappho would eventually meet Gray over VR chat, somewhere between July and September of 2021. A 16-year-old teenager. They would talk over Discord, and it would eventually lead to them doing VR online cuddling sessions, and she would kind of take the role as a mother figure in their chats. That eventually escalated to even more inappropriate stuff happening in VR chat. You know, more than just cuddling. Gray fortunately eventually realized that what they were doing was very weird and borderline illegal, so they reported it to the admins of the specific VR chat worlds they visited. The admins swiftly banned Sappho, and she would be perma-banned on the VR chat Discord as well. This is far from over though. Following this ban, Sappho would eventually decide to create her own Discord server for furries and stuff like that, and she would eventually open up a channel for drawn images of animals that were definitely not safe for work, or honestly safe for life. One of the mods, Matcha Tiger, confronted Sappho on this, essentially asking if she was a zoophile. She would go on and say that she respected the community as a therapist and doesn't think of it as anything wrong. Because of that, Matcha then decided to cut ties with Sappho and uploaded a tweet, or a twit longer, exposing her as somebody who supports animal love. In order to sweep this controversy under a rug, Sappho would use a very interesting tactic that definitely backfired. September 11th, 2021, Sappho would post a video coming out about things. A 36-minute rant essentially, where she fully admits to being a zoophile.
I am a zoophile. I do not have a thing for humans. I am more attracted to dogs, like German shepherds.
In that video, she tries to justify her love for animals by comparing it to the LGBTQ community, who used to be much less accepted than nowadays, which of course is not the best comparison, given that animals can't really give consent. This very video would gain her a ton of backlash and attention from all corners of the internet, including the furry community. Sappho wouldn't step down and make an apology video though, but she doubled down instead, skipping over her response music video to the haters. She would start an organization called Zoophiles Engagement for Tolerance and Acceptance North America, short ZNA, a group that is supposed to act as a safe space for people like Sappho who are also zoophiles or interested in that stuff. Less than 2 months later, this organization would crumble, as somebody inside the organization tried to transfer the very little funds they were able to raise into their own private wallets. And the whole organization and marketing was basically built off of lies, but I won't get into that. This still wouldn't be the end of Sappho's controversial history though. You gotta know, Sappho first denied all the allegations of being attracted to minors and doing stuff with minors. But on December 13th, Sappho would fully admit to being a MAP, which stands for Minor Attracted Person, aka a... And she admitted to it by making multiple tweets arguing that the age of consent is an iffy thing, etc. She would also talk about her being attracted to younger people, but only sometimes. And her excuse was that most of her partners have actually been older than her. All of this would lead to her Twitter account being suspended. Being suspended on Twitter is a different kind of achievement. She would then also be caught talking inappropriately to other 16-year-olds, which also included exchanging explicit images, voice messages, which I've listened to, and I'm severely traumatized, and doing more than just therapy sessions in VR chat again. So the whole not being attracted to humans was a goddamn lie. If you're eating right now, I'm sorry. Brown-nosed pup, aka Messy Tails, is a very mysterious individual. You could say he's kinda like an urban legend. He published his first tweet on July 29th, 2013, letting the world know that he forgot to wipe his butt. He then tweets that he didn't actually forget to wipe, hinting that he actually likes it that way. His entire account is essentially a pretty detailed documentation of his increasingly more brave experiments with, you know, the brown stuff. A typical tweet of his looks like this: I want to be force-fed meals made with my own mess. peanut butter and sandwiches, chocolate milkshakes, donuts. His early days mostly consisted of fantasies and made-up scenarios, and this continues for years. Years of him just texting away about his love for Nutella and what he's been up to in his life in general. For example, in August of 2014, he asked the Twitter people if they have messy dreams and what they're like. Or in November, where he described how he's not able to sit without leaving stains. Again, I'm really sorry if you're eating right now. 3 entire years go by, where he buys a car, buys a furry suit, and tries to look for an apartment where he can live out his messy dreams. And at this point, he has sent hundreds of tweets with little to no attention from the Twitter community. He gets a couple of likes, but that's pretty much it. He basically tweets to nobody. In 2016, he then starts to post pictures as well. And do not look them up, but yes, they do contain the poopy. All over hands, all over objects, etc. And I feel like this caption says enough. Finally, here's what was left after I licked everything clean. It was a good meal. I might need to clean my paws, but I have a tongue for that. So slowly but surely, he went from fantasies to actually doing the things he wanted to do, with real proof. All of this very interesting behavior wouldn't go unnoticed either, because in August of 2017, 4 years after his first tweet, Messy Tails tweeted this. Hehe, they can put me in a hospital and make me take pills, but now I'm gone and nobody can stop me from covering myself in the mud. So it's clear that the people around him have noticed his obsession and tried to keep him mentally in check, but it didn't seem to help at all, because just 8 days later he would post, I need to find a way to become psychologically, irreversibly addicted to the stinky. And can't stop eating poopy. In a matter of a few years, it has gone from some interesting fantasies to a genuinely dangerous addiction that already brought him to the hospital once. And his last ever post would be in 2018. Things have been rough lately. I'm going to be okay, but it might take a while. I hope you're all doing well and staying messy. And then he would go radio silent. About a whole year later, around 2019, Barcrow, a random Twitter user, would reply to one of Messy Tails' posts saying that he has unfortunately died from an overconsumption of his own feces and lack of nutrients. And that is actually what solidified his name within the community. Messy Tails, the person who died because they ate their own matter. But there was no actual proof that this account actually knew what happened to the real Messy Tails. Until 2021, Wang, somebody who also made a video about this interesting individual, messaged the account that said all these things. And it turns out it was just BS. So till this day, nobody knows what happened to the real Messy Tails. He might be dead, he might be in the hospital again, or he might still be crunching on his own stuff. Donthawk Cacti, or DHC, was a very popular company that created fursuits for furries. They would be highly sought after because their fursuits had such high quality and cute designs. The company was founded by Scuff and Lucky, 2 people who were very involved in the furry community. But Lucky would be the reason the successful company would catch on fire and would taint her and her husband's image as these friendly, successful furries. It started on September 25th, 2021, when Cutens published a 100-page document on Twitter with dozens of testimonies accusing Lucky of various crimes, like a document almost worse than the Diddy files. Within a document there were screenshots of an entire group chat that Lucky was a part of, where she discussed various spicy interests of hers and her being a dom and stuff, with 2 minors in the group chat, fully aware that they were not of age. I go through one of the dozens of testimonies to give you a bigger picture. One person stepped forward and talked about their relationship with Lucky. I call this person Fox. Fox explained how she was very close to Lucky and spent a lot of time with her. They would stay on calls for hours on end until it was late at night. And during these late night calls, Lucky would begin to show Fox non-safe for work drawings of furries. Now Fox was 19 at the time, so it's not illegal, but just kinda weird. But that continued until one day, Fox wanted to go to a party with Lucky. But instead, Lucky allegedly encouraged them to stay at her place to test their drinking limit. Even though, as already said, Fox was 19 at the time, which made her under the legal drinking age. At some point, Fox and Lucky were also more intimate with each other, and Fox described it as a very unpleasant experience. Now the very next day, Lucky then allegedly proceeded to tell multiple people about what they did, and lied about Lucky taking Fox's first time. But the list of accusations goes on. According to Fox and multiple other testimonies, she was fairly open about being a zoo and having her first time with her dog. Now there was never any actual evidence to prove these allegations, but she did have a public Fur Affinity account, which is a platform to post furry art on. And on there she did upload multiple drawings of German Shepherds with various degrees of lewdness. And she drew herself as a dog doing things with German Shepherds. The captions also say stuff like, G-Sheps are so handsome, just can't resist, alongside some other comments, which does indicate that she at least had fantasies about this type of stuff. Like, who would genuinely make these drawings and put themselves in these situations just for fun? And the worst thing is, she actually owned a German Shepherd as a pet at that time, which makes this whole situation just even more disturbing. Lucky also had a very long history of treating her pets very badly and neglecting them, with a pattern of adopting or purchasing pets just to abandon them when they became too difficult to handle. The document that covered all of this spread like a wildfire, and in order to keep DHC from losing sales and going under, they did a ton of things to try to disprove this, such as making tweets, video statements, and going on podcasts. But all of these attempts weren't enough to disprove the mountains of testimonies that the document had. But somehow, despite all the outrage and hate that Lucky and the company received, the operation is still running and making sales till this day. Zelda Wolf, aka Aaron Thomas Usury, spent a lot of his time on DeviantArt, a relatively normal art sharing platform where he would post art of his furry identity. Around September of 2014 though, he would meet these two 12-year-old girls who liked his art. And yes, it goes exactly where you think it'll go. He could have just said thank you and that's it, but instead he decided to talk to both of them. Their relationship started relatively friendly, talking about art and their problems and stuff, but eventually turned more and more inappropriate as they moved from DeviantArt to Skype and Google Hangouts to keep in touch. After some time, it reached a point where he convinced the girls to send pictures and videos of themselves to Aaron. And of course, he would do the same as well. Now, for whatever reason, he also decided to send a video of him having relations with his dog to the 12-year-old girls. This relationship would go unnoticed for months, until the mother of one of the girls actually discovered their videos and chat logs and reported it to the police. On April 11, 2015, the police raided Aaron's home and seized all of his devices, such as laptops and phones, etc. And they found all the evidence they needed, and so he was arrested on April 12th and sentenced to 17 years. So for once, somebody was actually punished for their crimes, which unfortunately isn't the case for the next person. Court Kitty, aka Gabriel Sickle, is a 30-year-old furry who has been in the community for years. He makes music and is kind of a dancer, I guess, but he isn't actually known for any of these artistic endeavors of his. He actually made his first waves within the furry community because of his smell. His fursuit apparently reeked so bad that people were actively avoiding him at conventions. It got so bad that somebody even put a note on his door that literally just says stinker. And given that people walk around with a literal mask on their head at these conventions, which makes smelling things a lot harder, this was an achievement for sure. Now, despite all that, he actually managed to get married, with of course a furry themed wedding, and he became a father as well. And this is where his first serious controversy begins. Once he actually had a son, he decided to bring him to a baby fur meetup. A baby fur is essentially a furry who likes to roleplay as a younger character or baby. This community also has a lot of common with the ABDL community, which stands for Adult Baby Diaper Lover, which are adults who like to wear baby clothes and diapers. Obviously now, this can probably be something innocent and stuff, but there's no denying that non-safe for work activities are very present within these communities. So bringing your actual infant child to such a meetup would be very, very disturbing. Luckily, he decided to not go through that because of all the backlash he got from that idea. He himself justified it by saying that the idea of bringing an infant child to a baby fur meetup would be pretty funny, and that his intentions were innocent. Well, Court Kitty would also be caught following multiple non-safe for work cup accounts on Twitter. Cup referring to baby animals. And now combine this with non-safe for work. Yeah, you kind of get it, right? So he definitely had some kind of attraction to younger beings. On top of that, he also commissioned baby fur art of his own son, which leaves even a worse aftertaste. Now remember when I said he got married? Well, his wife would divorce him just 3 years after because of exactly these reasons. And some more. During the divorce and fight for custody of the children, his wife would point out that he had bookmarked a guide on having relations with dogs. Yes, a tutorial on how to make love to your dog. And he had also saved the zoozadist website. Zoozadists being people who derive pleasure from hurting animals. Now he would use the excuse of saying, I was just curious though, and pointed out that he would never actually engage in that type of stuff, which doesn't really hold up when his wife also pointed out that she walked in on him when he and his dog were doing things with peanut butter. If you don't know what that means, dogs like to lick peanut butter. Gabe would also straight up admit to his wife that he had relations multiple times with dogs, which isn't far-fetched, because he admitted himself that he enjoys videos of cats mating, and followed and was friends with a ton of furries who were proven to be zoozadists, and straight up just PDF files, and they were actually convicted of their crimes, such as Growley, who will come up in just a second. He also talked to a 17-year-old when he was 27, Dr. Disrespect style, and a few more other things. Now Gabriel still tries to defend all of these allegations and still remains active on social media, even though the entire furry community has essentially shunned him. Mr. Teryaki and Acid Rain Cloud are a couple in the furry community, and at least Teryaki would be known for his dance performances during conventions or on YouTube, but both of them would actually rise to semi-celebrity status after one particular conversation was leaked. On August 22nd, 2023, Soul Smoothie would post a chat between their partner and Acid Rain Cloud, where Acid Rain Cloud reveals one very disturbing thing Acid and Mr. Teryaki like to do in bed. Now I'm nobody to judge, but I'm definitely gonna judge what they've been doing. Acid reveals that they like to play with fish. Essentially what they would do is fill Acid Rain Cloud with water and fish, you know, inside. Yeah, some messed up stuff. They would then engage in the act, and most fish would not make it. And the ones that do make it get put back in the bowl, just waiting until they decide to do it again. The self-snitching at this point ends with, it sounds kinda harsh to the fish, but it's kinda amazing. This does indeed not sound amazing. Now let's get into the darkest and most disturbing furries roaming this planet. Kyoto Wolf was a very popular furry YouTuber. He's been part of the furry community since 2012, probably before some of y'all were even born. He was also in a Shane Dawson video, where he was interviewed about his life as a furry, and he was one of the people who made this whole thing more mainstream and portrayed it as just a hobby instead of something weird. But of course, he wouldn't be in this iceberg if things didn't take a very, very dark turn in September of 2018. That month, some of Caro's Telegram logs were leaked, and if y'all know anything about Telegram, some sus behavior goes down there. Those chat logs allegedly showed him involved in some pretty disturbing stuff. It basically revealed that he was a part of a circle of furries who participated in not only but also necrophilia, animal torture, and discussions of being attracted to minors, which is all very, very illegal. The original leak came from Zoodenim, somebody who was a part of that circle, and a self-proclaimed zoo. But he himself was so disturbed by all of that he just had to leak it, so you can imagine what was going on. The chat contained Caro and other members of the group talking about doing it with animals that are not alive anymore. He describes how he prefers animals who are already not breathing instead of turning them into this state just for the sake of performing what they want to perform. And a ton of graphic videos were also leaked, and quite a lot of them depict furries inside that group doing the most disturbing things to animals even imaginable. There were so many crimes being admitted in that chat by just Caro alone, such as him doing things to his dog, Coda, and feeling guilty after he passed away. These types of allegations will obviously destroy a person's career, and before those leaks he was one of the big faces of the furry community, and so the internet did a lot of digging to see if the claims were actually true, and Caro obviously denied all of these allegations by saying that he was hacked and it was all fake. Communities such as the 4chan community and Kiwi forums analyzed every single message and video that was sent in there, and it would turn out that the Caro that was in the group chat talked about so many intricate details of his life that it would be almost impossible to fake. But one of the biggest pieces of evidence that would prove that Caro was almost 100% part of this group chat and this community would be the Beast Forum, an absolute vile website dedicated to zoo talking about how they have relations with animals and giving each other advice on that type of stuff. One of the profiles that was active on this very website was called the Dogman 2, just one out of these thousands of registered accounts. But something about this profile was different. On January 22nd, 2012, so way before those leaks would even surface, the Dogman would post a picture of a dog that looked eerily similar to a dog that Caro posted on his public Fur Affinity page. But if you actually look at the dates, Carol's dog was posted on their forum months before it appeared on any public social media of his, so there was no way that the Dogman 2 just ripped off the image off of Carol's page. His other posts on Beast Forum also aligned with the exact timeline of Carol's life. For example, when he moved to a college in Pittsburgh, there was a post from the Dogman asking to meet other zoophiles in the Oakdale area, and coincidentally, Oakdale is a suburb of Pittsburgh. Once people started noticing this suspicious pattern, Carol deleted all of the photos of his dog from his Fur Affinity account. Carol was obviously panicking and trying to erase evidence. The netizens then found a video of a furry having relations with their dog. Terribly disturbing, but putting that aside, the person who appeared in that video shared a lot of similar traits with Carol, such as having the exact same shoes and the exact same sweater. Now the dog that had to be in that video also had the same facial pattern, same white front paws, same white fur on the chest, and same red collar like the dog Coda. It was pretty clear. Years of chat logs that precisely matches with Carol's life, an account that somehow has access to pictures before Carol was able to post them on any of his socials, and a video that showed a person that matches almost identically with Carol himself. Carol was indeed a zoozadist, and probably more. Once the internet gathered all that evidence, it was submitted to the police, but he was never charged. Most likely because bestiality is treated as a minor crime in New York, so you can only take legal actions for up to 2 years after the crime happened, and the proof was submitted after that 2-year time frame. So legally there was nothing that could punish him. Now Carol is still certain that he's innocent, and even made a couple of videos trying to explain that all of this was fake. But of course, after all this evidence surfaced, nobody believed him. But at least some of the other members in that group chat were actually charged, such as somebody with the name of Snake Thing, who I'll also talk about. Shadow Wolf is probably the face of disturbing furries, and he earned that title for a reason. To properly introduce him, I'll read you his own bio that he made over a decade ago. I'm a 52-year-old furry bisexual, male, bi, pretty sure you just said that, but okay, and an active plushie file, but it doesn't stop there. As you may know, there's this fact going around the internet that furries will spend thousands of dollars on their hobby. Well, one of the reasons why is because fursuits go for crazy amounts, like you could buy a car with that type of money. So some people decide to create their own fursuits instead. Shadow Wolfus, aka William Bill J. Clark, being one of them. But instead of buying new materials, he would use the plushies that he bought to have fun with and cut them up to make his fursuits. And this is how these abominations were created. That is why he's also known as Carpet Sample. They do not just look even more terrifying than the dolphin muzzles, but also smelled worse. This suit is known as the worst and most disgusting fursuit ever created, and that is because he never cleaned the plushies that he had relations with, and so they reeked of urine and other substances that I won't mention. Every person who met him in real life was probably traumatized by that smell. Shadow Wolfus somehow has multiple pets and openly talks about engaging with all of them regularly, like very open. He described in detail what he did to them without any shame whatsoever. He literally admits to getting these pets only for this one reason, and you can kinda tell by the pictures. His place has trash everywhere, like he does not actually care about the health of his pets whatsoever. One of the tamest statements of his is that he hasn't had any relations with a male husky yet, but will soon once he gets one for a pet. That is the tamest, most family-friendly sentence that he wrote. Shadow Wolf has even dedicated his entire job to his hedonistic pleasures, I guess, since he once was a dog walker, and you can kinda guess what happened to these unlucky animals that had to be with him. He wouldn't be a very disturbing individual only towards dogs and the internet though. First, he got banned from multiple conventions because of his behavior. For example, he was once banned from the Method Fur Meet for proposing to have relations with another furry called Moonstone Wind and her service dog while alone in an elevator with her. Moonstone Wind must have been absolutely terrified, not only because of his proposal that included her dog, but also probably because of his smell. In general, he would just go up to people and start a conversation about all of the disgusting things he does, like just randomly. Not surprisingly, he also convinced a minor to do stuff for alcohol, but luckily he hasn't been active in over a decade now. Growley, or Daniel Mitsuho Lamas, has been in the furry community since 1999. In the year 2000, he met this person online who was really interested in him and his boyfriend at the time, Troy Gate. So interested to the point that he wanted to play with both of them. That person was a minor, and Growley continually told him that he couldn't do anything with him because of that reason. He was a grown adult after all. The conversation between him and that boy continued through 2001, until about March, when his boyfriend and Growley decided to finally meet up with him. Growley didn't actually want to meet up, but was convinced to do so by both his boyfriend and that other person. So Troy and Daniel booked hotel rooms to stay at, and they actually met that person in real life. It eventually got late, and his boyfriend insisted on staying in the hotel room with that boy they talked to. Growley was actually against that idea because it seemed kinda inappropriate, but he was only 24 at the time and young and impressionable, so he ended up staying there as well, and they all slept in the same hotel room. And that's it. At least that's the version that Growley told the public. In reality, Growley actually sent inappropriate images to that boy, and once they met up, he and his boyfriend actually got caught having relations with him in that hotel room and took photos during the acts. The boy then actually contacted the authorities on June 4th, and when Growley was just at home with his parents, the police came in and detained him with over 10 charges to his name. He and his boyfriend first denied all of the allegations, but eventually pleaded guilty after months of trying to get a better deal and negotiating. So he served 2 years of a 3-year sentence and became a registered offender for life. It doesn't end there though. When does it ever, right? After being released and finishing his parole, he would be caught again talking to a 16-year-old on Furry. The 16-year-old talks about being able to do something because of yoga, and I think I sadly know what he's talking about, but I'm not gonna say it out loud. If you know, you know. He then elaborated that he can't show Growley because he's shy, and if word got out, the FBI would be after him. Growley of course responds with, he won't report him if he's not of age yet. Spiral Wolf then suggests that he should do yoga too, so he'll be able to do the same thing. And Growley ends the conversation with, you could show me. I won't tell, XD. He really did not take any breaks after being released from prison, because after that conversation got leaked, the internet did just a bit more digging, and they actually found a few other chat logs between Daniel and another guy who wasn't of age either. Growley being 33 at the time, and the other person's 17. Again, I will not go into detail what they actually talk about, but they basically both describe what they would do if they met up and stuff. Imagine like 50 Shades of Grey, but even worse and even more weird. These attempts to do stuff with guys that were literally half his age unfortunately would go unpunished. But the universe did its thing on July 10th, 2019, where he would be charged with possessions of movies that included children. And I'm not talking about Toy Stories. But he was somehow actually released on September 26th, which is crazy. Only a couple of months for literally owning the most deprived videos imaginable. Now all of that did result in him getting banned from a couple of furry conventions, such as Antho Northwest 2017, but he's still welcome to attend most of the other conventions, even though almost the entire furry community is very much against him going on any conventions at all anymore. He also beefed with a lot of people on Twitter who exposed his past, saying that he's a changed person now and stuff, which I don't know if that's how it works. Can somebody like him really just change? But his account is now private. Lockjaw Arts was a company run by Blackcraft Witch, aka Tanya R. Dillard, and their partner Jax Luna, aka Jacob Berkowitz. And similar to DHC, they made fursuits. Now, even though the Lockjaw Arts account was kind of, you know, a company social media account, they didn't only talk about their product, but shared very intimate details about themselves as well, like how they struggled with mental health, depression, and stuff like that. These personal issues caused a lot of delays for the customer, because they might have promised to have a fursuit made until this date, but because of their personal struggles, they weren't able to fulfill the order. And if that happens enough times, business will obviously suffer, because people will lose trust in your company and brand. And that was most likely the case, which resulted in serious financial struggles for them. And safe to say, mental health problems and money struggles are a dangerous combination. In March of 2020, Tanya and Jacob concocted a plan to make some quick cash to get out of this tricky situation they're in. They created a dating ad on Craigslist, which was apparently a thing, I don't know, and Hector Hernandez actually responded. It was definitely some trio lobby kind of ad, because on March 27th, Hector picked both of them up and took them to his residence. Now unfortunately, instead of doing what they actually promised in the ad, they robbed him instead and pew-pewed him 4 times, and then stabbed him another 25 times at least, until he passed away in his own bathroom. Now after robbing him, first thing you gotta do is obviously phone a friend and snitch on yourself. And yes, Tanya did exactly that. She called her friend Paige and first told her that she and her boyfriend had taken a dog's dive and skinned it, which was obviously very shocking to hear, but Tanya responded to her disturbed reaction with, "If you think that is strange, I'm sitting next to a not so alive person," and then sent Paige a picture of Hector. And this is where Paige actually drew the line, and decided to report the incident to the police. They immediately set up surveillance at Hector's residence and observed the couple. Now their initial plan was to rob him, take his car, and go live in the woods for the rest of their lives. So they eventually decided to execute the second part of the plan and left the house with his Mercedes. To be honest, I don't know why the police just didn't take action immediately, but both Tanya and Jacob would actually be detained after a traffic stop, where they admitted to everything. During the interrogation or interview, Tanya actually told a different story of why they took Hector's life. She explained that they made an ad asking to be driven somewhere, but Hector actually touched Tanya's leg and tried to kiss them, and so Jacob hit him in the spur of the moment. But Jacob just flat out admitted that it was a planned attack, so they were both charged with 4 felony counts, but I couldn't find anywhere how many years they actually got. If you've paid attention to the Carol the Wolf story, you'll have seen the username SnakeThing pop up a couple of times. Well, he is arguably worse than Carol, by far. His real name is Levi Dane Simmons, and he was born on December 20th, 1994. He already got into the whole thing from an early age. His first encounter was when he was around 8 or 9. One day he was just home alone and decided for whatever reason to bend over in front of the family dog at the time. A similar thing to the peanut butter incident then happened. The people around him were also already cautious of him. For example, he was once kicked off of the school bus because he did inappropriate things to his classmates. This sentence sums it up perfectly. He's had problems for a long time. Skipping a few years, when he was in the middle of puberty, he was already getting into the more hardcore stuff in terms of watching and doing, which of course also included animals. And this sick interest of his would only worsen over time. He joined the furry community around May or June of 2010 after he talked about the fandom just out of curiosity with a friend, and he found his kind of people in that community relatively fast. People who shared the same dark, twisted secrets. And so one day he decided to create the infamous Zuzadem Telegram group that I already talked about. He shared his experiences within that group, such as having relations with a literal baby, and he would try to push the others in that group to do these things as well. He liked corrupting them. Like a lot of people that I already mentioned, he took advantage of vulnerable people and animals. Like this 12-year-old girl that he convinced to do stuff on camera, who was just very confused and opening up to him, as well as the times where he did things to his sister's dogs. And he also actively enjoyed hurting animals. Probably one of the most sickening stories is how SnakeThing describes in detail how he had relations with a 10 to 12 week old puppy with the help of a friend. They first gave her medication and then did the most brutal stuff you can imagine. Like literally the most brutal stuff. But it resulted in the dog wiggling and twitching and yelping and whining, despite the medication they gave that puppy. He also said that at least over half the time it was unconsciously done. He was nervous at first, but once he got going, all of his doubts melted away. He described the experience as fantastic. After they were done, he asked his friend to leave the pup somewhere in the town, but he wasn't even sure whether or not his friend just straight up ended the dog. Not just the messages were evidence enough though. They filmed the entire thing and took photos, some of them containing his entire face. And there's actually a reason for that. Normally, if you're a part of such a group, you would try to hide your identity, because you either know deep down that what you're doing is incredibly disturbing and wrong, or you just don't want to get caught by the police. But SnakeThing actually liked that feeling. He liked being blackmailed, and sometimes deliberately shared private information, like his full name, to the others, who could potentially expose him. And he also just liked bragging about the things he did, basically incriminating himself. And that eventually led to his demise. As I already said, Pseudonym eventually leaked the entire group chat and actively led SnakeThing on for 2 entire years to collect as much information as possible, so he would hopefully end up in jail or at least be exposed for the monster he is. With all that information, the internet was basically able to find out everything about him. They found an address, they already knew his full government name, and they quickly found all the alt accounts that he created to try and hide. And all this information was forwarded to the local authorities. But when the police eventually showed up to his place, they found nothing. He and his family haven't actually lived at that address for over a year. And for SnakeThing, all of this happened so quickly that he panicked, and so he even ran from his current home. Around this time, his mother also got wind of all of this stuff happening, because one of his friends admitted to what they did, and she was understandably distraught. Maybe he will come clean to me. Maybe I can convince him to just go to the police, and I'll go with him. I know it's scary, but he has no survival skills. I don't believe in shielding people from their consequences of their actions. Please don't tell him I know or he will run. I want to talk to him and At what point he actually came back to the house, I'm not sure. But on October 25th, 2018, the police went to his new address and arrested him with charges of everything basically. Animal neglect, animal SA, and more. And they seized all of his devices that contained a lot of evidence. The furry community and the internet was happy. He was about to be punished, even if it's just a fraction of what he actually did. A win is a win. Well, 3 days later, he would be released again.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, I was wondering if I could call and ask on the status of a current inmate.
Who's that?
Levi Dane Simmons.
He was released.
Would it be a case just like Carol's, and would Snake Thing be a free man because of some technicality, like the evidence being submitted too late? 2 entire days pass without anybody knowing what's gonna happen to him. When the news comes out that the district attorney is still pursuing charges, but they wanted more than to just punish him for animal neglect. They wanted to punish him for all of the crimes he did, such as him filming content of children that weren't inappropriate at all. All the evidence was there, but they needed to prevent him from taking any deal that might land him only 2 or 3 years instead of the time he actually deserved. So they had to drop the charges for now to sort through the mountains of videos and chat logs, etc. It was a gamble. He would be a free man for now and could do God knows what, but it's hopefully gonna worth it when he gets sentenced for an even longer time. And he was a free man for quite a while actually. It took over a year until he would be apprehended again on December 4th, 2019. But now, along his initial charges, he would be charged with additional 31 other things, such as 19 counts of encouraging inappropriate behavior towards children in the 2nd degree, which is like owning movies of, children and stuff. I'm not stretching. 19 counts of just that. On March 9th, 2020, he ended up entering a plea deal, which is kind of like this negotiation thing, but he was still sentenced to 300 months, aka 25 years, and is a registered offender for life. So he's actually gonna come out in his 50s. This is the Yost family. They consist of Jennifer Goodwill Yost, her husband Christopher Yost, and 3 children, 2 of them being only 6 and 9, and the oldest one, Caitlin, being 17. The entire family, but of course especially mom, stepdad, and Caitlin, were very involved in the furry fandom. They would quite regularly meet up with other furries and play bowling, the group being called La Habra Fur Bowling, and be attendees at the Prancing Skill Tear monthly parties. Jennifer was kind of seen as the local mom of the community. She was known for her kindness and always helping others if they had any problems. She also made like clothes and stuffed animals for her children. Wholesome, furry, family, fun stuff. Through all of these activities, the family eventually met Frank Felix and Josh Acosta, who are of course both furries as well. And Josh was actually also involved in the brony community, which is apparently a male fan of the TV show My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. But that actually isn't important to the story. I just didn't know about that and wanted to share my findings. Anyways, they both kind of became acquaintances to the family, and especially Frank would start talking more and more to Caitlin. On Facebook, they would talk about both having experienced bullying and their shared interests in the furry community and anime. Now, because of the age gap that was present, Frank was 25 and she was 17, the people around him started talking about that dynamic and how their friendship might be inappropriate, Also, Caitlin was kind of known for having dated older men that her parents didn't approve of, so that played a factor as well. But nonetheless, Caitlin kept talking to both Frank and Josh for a couple of months, until her parents actually stepped in and told her to stop talking to them. They wanted to protect her, right? But we all know if parents try to forbid a relationship like that, it almost never actually works out. On a Saturday morning, to be more specific, September 24th, 2016, the police dispatchers receive a 911 call from a very, very young girl. That little girl speaks into the phone and says, "My parents are..." By 8:26 a.m., the police arrive at the scene and they find 3 people. All of them passed away because of gunshot wounds. But there are still 2 people in the house, 2 children. The little girl who called, who is 6, and another child who is 9. Now, according to the records, there's supposed to be a 17-year-old girl living here as well, but she's nowhere to be found. The very next day, the police arrest 2 main suspects. And you might have guessed it already, they arrest Josh Acosta and Frank Felix. And the missing girl Caitlin was taken into custody as well. Now, what exactly happened? Did Frank and Caitlin plan out the killing of her parents so they can live out their forbidden relationship? I mean, it was also known that Caitlin was emotionally unstable, so it could be. Surprisingly, the reality is even darker than that. As Caitlin became closer with both of them, she actually confessed to Josh that her stepfather has done inappropriate things to her, and it was happening on a weekly basis from the ages of 7 to 15, and her mother never knew about the situation. One thing led to another, and the group decided that Josh and Frank would go over to Caitlin's house and tell the mom about the inappropriate things that happened, and then get Caitlin as far away from the house as possible. That's it. Just a very, very uncomfortable conversation. Frank gave Josh a ride to the house, and Caitlin and Frank then waited in the truck while Josh entered the residence. But instead of talking, Josh just straight up pew-pewed the mother, the stepfather, and a family friend who just happened to be there at the time. Josh just kinda saw him as collateral damage. After finishing that, Josh went back to the car and they all drove away. Caitlin somehow didn't hear anything and didn't even know what Josh just did to her parents. Jumping back to the arrest, by September 27th, Frank and Josh were charged with 3 counts of murder. Because it turns out that Frank, who stayed in the car, actually helped destroy evidence and provided Josh with the that he used. So both of them planned that without involving Caitlin at all. Even though the police thought that Caitlin might be a suspect as well, she was actually granted immunity because of her testimony, and the 2 children who were in the house at the time received counseling and were relocated to live with their relatives. The person who happened to be at the house at the time, who had nothing to do with any of this at all, had a 3-year-old daughter, which was pretty tragic. Really just wrong time, wrong place. Now let's go over to the anime fans, who took their obsession way too far. Just imagine for once that you're a pretty smart student who has so far lived a pretty ordinary life. One day in class, you just happen to find a book that just falls out of the sky. When you go to pick it up, you realize that it isn't Harry Potter, which you could have sold on Craigslist, but something else. A book that is able to the person whose name is written in it. Now imagine you're also a hidden genius psychopath who decides to use this book to cleanse the world of all criminals. And because of all these sudden deaths of bad people, you also build a small fan base of people who like what you're doing and call you Kira. That is the plot of Death Note, the second most popular anime ever. Light Yagami, aka Kira, plays the psychopathic dude on his murder spree while trying not to get caught. Now there are tons of people obsessed with this anime and Light Yaga. For some reason, people just really like the whole psychopath, genius type of character. At around 6 PM on September 28, 2007, 2 hikers find a human body and 2 legs in a park in Belgium. There's nothing else on their body, no personal items or anything that would identify him or the but 2 notes were found nearby with the message saying "Watashi wa Kira desu," which roughly translates to "I am Kira." Shit's crazy. A real dead person next to a Death Note reference. That was not the only mention of anime or Japan though. Once the police arrived, they also discovered a trail left by the killers in the form of a 160-foot line of rice that led to a symbol that is supposed to be something in Japanese. Not sure what it's supposed to mean though, I can't lie. Now the police had no proper leads at all. The detectives concluded that the body was either a few days old when found or had been stored in some sort of freezer. The thighs and his sack were cut with almost surgical precision, and the only thing that they could identify was the fact that it was a Caucasian guy between 20 and 30 years old. There was no missing person matching that description. And the only witness was some jogger who said that she saw some blonde man lying down in the area where the body was discovered. This broke the media, and so there were a lot of speculations that the police was just throwing around, such as it being a prank by medical students because of the surgical precision, and the date of the discovery matched the beginning of the school year. The University of Brussels argued though that it would be almost impossible for a whole body to just disappear without anybody noticing, so that wasn't a good lead. Imagine you could just walk in there, take a body, and nobody would notice. Wouldn't seem like a very safe university. Other people thought it might be the work of a psychopath serial killer that was active between 1996 and 1997, the so-called Butcher of Mons, where 5 women were found in garbage bags without the killer ever being identified. It got really crazy, like listen to this. The location of the victim was very close to the highest point of Brussels, possibly a symbolic location since Kira acts as a god of death in the manga. That was out of the actual wiki of the case. Might as well just say that Kira got reincarnated into this world. On November 24th, the police announced that they reached a dead end on the 2-month-old case, and the media was low-key geeked. A murder that nobody could solve, referring to Death Note, and they just wouldn't find any conclusion to the case. Until 3 entire years later, around September of 2010, the police managed to arrest 4 suspects linked to this case. 3 people for the actual and one person for failing to provide assistance to a person in danger. It turns out that the deceased person actually lived with multiple of the at the time of the disappearance. An argument broke out between them and the victim refused to leave the apartment when asked, and so it turned physical. They supposedly beat the person until he passed and tried to dissolve the body in the drain cleaner. Some vile stuff. When they came back some days later, according to one of the killers, it stank and was bluish, so they cut the body into pieces. They tried to burn it, but eventually decided to scatter the remainings in the park. In June 2013, 2 of the 4 suspects were convicted and received sentences of 20 years. A third suspect was convicted to 23 years since she went on the run after appearing in court for only 1 day. You've gotta be crazy if you're trying to run from this case. Now the real question is actually, why were there multiple notes saying I am Kira? Well, it turns out they were just really big fans of the manga and anime, and so they decided to leave them there. And they didn't even spell the sentence correctly. They wrote Watashi wa Kira desu, but it's supposed to be Watashi wa Kira desu. I'm no Japanese bro though, so I'm just repeating what my sources say. 2015, Japan. Maya Tomita is 20 years old, studying business and pursuing her passion in the entertainment industry. She has already made a small name for herself by appearing in the TV drama Secret Girls, which was basically a show about these girls living a secret double life as a Japanese idol group. Kinda like Batman, but with more singing and less fighting crime, I think. But after doing a few side gigs here and there, she decided to become an independent artist and musician. In order to gain popularity, since she was still pretty underground, she traveled to different restaurants and venues to play her songs. During these shows, she slowly builds up her following and meets a ton of new people, including Tomohiro Iwasaki. He's around 26 when he first discovers her. He is essentially the polar opposite of Tomita. Her professors describe Tomita as having this very bubbly personality and being very kind and outgoing in general. Iwasaki, on the other hand, has basically isolated himself for the past years. He barely has any friends or social interactions in general. He's like the role model of 4chan users. His brother described him as unskilled in expressing his emotions, but also a gentle and childlike soul. From the first time he saw her, Iwasaki really liked Tomita, and she wouldn't be the first person he would later become absolutely obsessed with. The thing is, Iwasaki had a history of stalking idols and documenting their every move on his blog, where he would share all his thoughts and feelings. And he was a very passionate individual. It would escalate to a point where multiple police reports would be filed against him for following idols in real life and sending them threats. But the worst crime would have yet to come. Like with all the other Japanese idols, Iwasaki quickly became infatuated with Tomita. He would start off as a passionate fan of her and her work, giving her chocolates and little gifts after her performances, which could still be seen as quite normal. I mean, fans give stuff to their idols or role models all the time. But as time went on, he became more and more obsessed. In 2016, after giving her various gifts ranging from flowers to weird-ass books, he built up this fantasy that they're gonna become a thing somehow. I mean, he gave her so many cool things, right? So Iwasaki would decide to propose to her in the restaurant she would perform at that night, with his biggest gift yet, a very expensive gold watch, along with random books. So far, Tomita has been quite nice to him, accepting his gifts and all that, but she obviously couldn't marry this guy. They never even talked outside of her performing, so she rejected him, but she gave him his Twitter so he could check out what she was doing more often, and somehow that seemed to satisfy Iwasaki. Although he was like very isolated from everyone essentially, and seemed like the perfect guy to run a Discord server, he actually only used Ameba. I don't know how to pronounce it, to be honest. A Japanese social networking and blogging platform. So getting access to her Twitter seemed like something very intimate to him, although it definitely wasn't. And so he followed Tomita and a friend of hers, who also performed that night he proposed. Right away, this guy started tweeting like crazy. I'm talking dozens of tweets in a day. Also his idol and her friend. By now, Tomita was more than creeped out and knew that if she actually responded to him, she would only feed more into Iwasaki's fantasies. So she just straight up ignored him. Her friend though initially replied to Iwasaki, since she probably didn't know that he literally attended almost every single one of Tomita's concerts and was just a creep in general. But even she stopped talking to him after a while, and being ignored for all that time kind of flipped a switch in him, which made his love for Mayu Tomita turn into hatred. He proceeded to spam her Twitter with over 400 messages telling her that she's looking down on him, that she's ungrateful, and he even threatened her life. In order to bring an end to all this, she decided to return the expensive watch he gave her and blocked him on Twitter at the end of April. That would be 12 days before the attack. On the 9th of May 2016, Tomita decided to file a police report against him since she did not feel safe at all. The police didn't really do anything though, since it did not fall under Japan's stalking laws back in the day, and they didn't think that harassment on social media was a serious enough threat. Police really was on demon timing. They did not care at all. At this point, Iwasaki has gone absolutely mental. Because Tomita blocked him, he spam messaged her friends on Twitter, demanding all of the gifts back now. The chocolate, the weird books, the flowers, he wanted all of that back. Brody, how do you expect chocolate to be returned? But what can you actually expect from a guy like him? Even though this was a very stressful time for Tomita and all her loved ones, she had to keep it pushing. She was trying to make it as a singer after all. So on May 21st, she was set to perform at an event called Solid Girls Night Volume 11. She publicly announced that she would be there, so she was obviously kinda scared that Iwasaki might pull up, and her worst nightmare became a reality. Before she could even enter the venue, Iwasaki confronted Tomita and asked her why she returned all of the gifts. Tomita was obviously frightened as a and gave a vague answer before trying to run away. When she turned around, Iwasaki stabbed her from behind in the chest and neck area 61 times with a 3.1-inch knife. He allegedly screamed, "You should die, die," while doing that. Eyewitnesses immediately called the police after hearing Tomita scream for help and arrested Iwasaki. You can see in the pictures, this guy doesn't seem to feel any type of remorse or shock at all. This is a genuine psychopath, bro. Tomita was in critical condition, but God knows how, Iwasaki didn't manage to damage any vital organs, so she managed to survive and regain consciousness on June 7, 2016. She lived. Unfortunately though, her dream of becoming a popular singer has been destroyed, since she had problems even talking or using her hands. She also suffered from PTSD, so imagine going on stage with that. The police later on issued an apology for not doing anything when she was literally begging for help, saying that they didn't know that the harassment was happening outside of social media as well. Iwasaki only received 14 years, but it actually led to Japan changing their anti-stalking laws to include online harassment on social media as well, so there was at least something positive coming out of this. Now this was an insane case of obsession, but this next case had even more casualties. Kyoto Animation is one of the greatest animation studios in Japan. It was the main publisher of a ton of insane animes, including K-On!, A Silent Voice, Free, and a bunch more. The company has multiple locations throughout Japan, but this story is about Studio One, the building actually dedicated to the animation side of things. It's 2018 and Kyoto Animation suddenly experiences an influx of hate messages. It starts off as threats and slander, but as time goes on, the messages develop into threats, even mentioning specific staff that are working for Kyoto Animation. This whole thing escalates to the point that in October of 2018, the company went to the police to investigate. The Kyoto police tried to find out who was behind these, at this point, hundreds of death threats, but couldn't pinpoint any person, as the creator used Tor to hide their information, kinda like the dark web type of alley. And so the police just kinda gave up. I mean, they're just empty threats after all, right? This would be the potential foreshadowing to one of the most tragic things happening in the anime industry ever. Shinji Aoba, 41 at the time, was staying at an internet cafe on July 16. According to eyewitnesses, he was seen walking around the area close to the animation studio, kinda just cooking up his plan, I guess. 2 days later, on the morning of July the 18th, Aoba walks into the studio, carrying 11 gallons of gasoline. He basically soaks the entire area, including several employees, before igniting it. He sets multiple employees on fire, including him during the process. Right away, the fire results in an explosion at around 10:31 AM due to the gasoline mixing with the air or something. I'm not a chemist. And Aoba supposedly screams "die" repeatedly as he carries out his act. The fire grows by the entrance, as Aoba just walked in there, and it traps the entire staff inside the building. Some workers try to escape through the second and third floors, but the explosion caused the floors to be filled with smoke within 30 seconds, making escape almost impossible. 5 hours later and the fire is under control, but it's only extinguished the next day at 6 AM. The building had no fire sprinklers or anything due to it being classified as a small office building, which is crazy to think about. Now before I talk about the aftermath of all this, which is absolutely insane, why did Shinji Aoba do all this? Did he not like the anime they produced? Was he just batshit crazy? Well, as I already said, he lit himself on too during the process, so he had to be rushed to the hospital with severe burns. While being transported there, he admitted to having started the fire, and he actually admitted doing it because of plagiarism. You heard me right? because of plagiarism. He accused the studio of stealing ideas from his novel. Aoba had submitted a draft novel to the studio, but it didn't even pass the first stage of assessment and was forgotten. But he was still convinced that they stole stuff from his work. Now let me just read out the scenes that were supposedly stolen. His main accusation was that in the anime Tsurune, there's a character in episode 5 who buys meat at a 20% discount. And his novel also happened to have a scene where the hero buys something at a 50% discount. That's it. Now there are also some other scenes that were supposedly stolen. So in the anime Free, right, there's a scene where a school banner reads "Swimming Club advanced to regional tournament." Aoba's novel apparently included a few scenes where banners appear too. This guy's not serious. And the last one is where a character in K-On! Says to a junior, "I repeated the grade." And in Aoba's story there's a scene where a high school boy is told by his teacher, "If you continue like this, you'll repeat the grade." Those were all the scenes that were apparently plagiarized. It's not like they happen to have the exact same concepts in terms of story or have very similar characters. They happen to have similar scenes, but they were completely different animes. The amount of times an anime girl punches a guy in the face, animation studios would be accused of plagiarism all the time. So let's talk about the disaster he actually created. 70 people were inside the studio at the time of the fire. 36 employees, most of them almost instantly because of the severe burns, and some of them because of the carbon monoxide a couple days later. Among some of the deceased were Naomi Ishida, a color designer who has worked for the company since 1992. She was the first victim who was identified as. Also Yasuhiro Takemoto, who was an animator, scriptwriter and director, in the fire. He's worked at Kyoto Animation for almost his entire career. And Yoshiji Kigami, a giant in the industry, a veteran who has worked on films like Akira and Studio Ghibli's Grave of the Fireflies. The world of anime and Japan lost so many important people that day because of this man. This event was one of the deadliest massacres in Japan since the end of World War II. Now Aoba was transferred to a university hospital and he received all the necessary surgery to survive. After 4 months of recovery, he was able to talk and wasn't in critical condition anymore. He got artificial skin and the whole package. After recovering, he said that he regretted his actions and was thankful for the staff, who treated him better than anyone has ever before. Could have thought about that before doing that, big bro. On December 16th, he was charged with attempted and a bunch of other things. And it turns out the novel might have just set off this behavior, but wasn't actually the cause of it, since Aoba had a prior criminal history and suffered from mental illness. In 2012, for example, he robbed a convenience store with a knife and was jailed for 3.5 years. And he did that just because, I guess. This whole court thing takes quite a while, but in January of 2024, he was finally sentenced and he received the death penalty, which he accepted. Pretty crazy if you think about it. They saved his life and proceeded to do surgery on him for months just to give him the death sentence. But I digress. After the attack, some of the employees who were involved in this tragedy returned to work at the other location of Kyoto Animation. But obviously some of them took extended breaks to deal with the stress and trauma, and the building was demolished. It's 4 p.m. The police in Tokyo receive a call that a man has been Once they arrive at the scene, they find a person seated on the floor. It's an attractive young woman sitting in the lobby of her building, but her legs and hands are covered in blood. She's sitting next to the man who's slowly out, literally just chilling with a phone in her hand. That woman was Yuka Takaoka. When all of this happened, Takaoka was a manager at a hostess club. A hostess club is basically a place Japanese men go to get their ego stroked. They go in, the girls working there pretend like they're the king of the world and make them buy drinks and spend money. There's also some spicy stuff going on behind the scenes, but most of the time it's really just talking and drinking. Imagine feeling like Justin Bieber in his prime, but you just pay for that feeling instead. Takaoka's job was kinda just overseeing the place and trying to milk out as much money out of these men as possible. Now on the side, Takaoka was also a huge anime fan. Who would have thought? Whole videos about otakus. She would do the typical thing of cosplaying characters and stuff like that. Nothing out of the ordinary. There was one type of character though she seemed to cosplay the most. Yanderes. If you're chronically online, you know what those are, but if not, yanderes are basically these girls in animes, or I guess also in real life, who are overly in love with somebody. Like that next level stuff. Anybody who gets near their crush gets stabbed and they become all crazy. That's like the whole story of the game Yandere Simulator, right? You're this girl who everybody and anything who stands in the way of your love. Now let's get back to the hostess club. Those are designed for Japanese men to talk to women, but there's also the female counterpart, host clubs. Women go there to just forget about reality and talk to young men. And in one of those host clubs, Phoenix Luna had just started working there as a host to make a living. It's obviously not his real name though. Even though he just started out, he actually managed to do pretty decently as a host. He was number 4 and for quite some time number 3 in terms of popularity, which didn't result in a lot of money, but it was enough to survive, since he was also able to sleep there. He just kinda had that nice look to him. I mean, he's not an ugly guy, no did he? So one night, Yuka Takaoka decided that work was pretty draining as a manager. So she just wanted to relax a little and get some male attention. And so she went to a fusion nightclub, the host club where Luna worked at. Now it was just something about this guy that caught Takaoka's attention. And so she chose him to entertain her for the night. She spends some money, has a pleasant night, and then goes home. As transactional as it gets basically. It's like somebody subbing to a big streamer. They get $5 and you get to see your name on the screen for a split second. But Takaoka just keeps thinking about this man, so she decides to return to the club over and over again. You gotta know, for the past years, Takaoka has only been focusing on stacking her bread, so she has some money to spend, at least for a while. So she goes in there and buys champagne after champagne, and the person who kinda makes her buy those drinks earns a commission, right? So Phoenix Luna is pretty happy about making more money. After a while, Takaoka notices that Luna is only ranked 4 on the leaderboard, and so she decides to spend even more money on him to get him up those ranks. And I'm not talking about a few $100s here and there. She spent up to 10k a month on Luna, which got him to rank 1 on the leaderboard within a month. They spend so much time together that Takaoka builds up this fantasy that if she just keeps spending money on him, he would eventually be able to quit his job and they could be a couple. Some down bad fantasy right there. This delusion escalated to a point where she would pay him to go on dates with her and paid extra money so she could reserve him every time she visited the club. Now Luna obviously kind of plays along since he's making decent money at this point, and it's kind of the job of somebody working there to be like a pretend boyfriend. And Takaoka would kind of know that since she literally works in the industry herself, but I guess if you got those pink glasses on, you can't be stopped. She proceeded to rent a whole apartment near Luna's club so they can move in together, and I guess Luna kinda agreed to live there part-time. This is the part where she actually turns full-on yandere herself. She gets so jealous of his work that she tells him that every time he meets a woman who's paying for his services, if you know what I mean, he should call and tell her. Remember, this man is not in a relationship with Takaoka at all. She's just paying him to pretend. Imagine a tier 3 sub tells Pokimane that she can't get in a relationship because he's her biggest fan.
Ain't funny.
But Luna kinda plays along because he's a sweet guy, and so he agrees to do so. On May 23rd, 2019, Luna calls Takaoka and tells her, hey, I'm meeting with another woman, strictly business, you know what I'm saying? Just wanted to let you know, even though this is literally the exact thing she told him to do, Takaoka goes mad. So mad that she makes up a plan to self-exit. But she's also like, if she's going to might as well take him with me so they can be happy in the afterlife. Kinda like Romeo and Juliet type of story. All this time, Luna obviously said I love you and stuff like that to her, but even she knew that he just did that because he got paid to do so. And in her head, if they both passed, his statements might become a reality. So she pretends like she didn't just come up with the most twisted, evil plan ever and tells him to go over to their apartment so he can help her clean the place. After they do that, and also for some change, he takes a bath to just kinda unwind and relax. While he's taking a nap, Takaoka decides to snoop through his phone and finds pictures of another woman at the nightclub with him. Those weren't even explicit or anything, just photos that align with his work, right? Luna steps out of the tub to go to sleep in the actual bed of the apartment, and it's all good. That night, Takaoka waits until about 3:50 AM to ensure he's really asleep. She takes out a knife and stabs him in his stomach. He obviously instantly wakes up, shocked that he literally has something in his body, and before being able to push her away, Takaoka sits on top of him, asking him if he really liked her. I think in this situation, every guy would do the same thing, and he just tells her, I love you, and then pushes her to the side. He runs towards the elevator to try to get out of the building ASAP, and Takaoka follows him after grabbing some things. Luna loses consciousness though, and so Takaoka literally drags his body to the lobby of their residence, and just sits next to him, waiting for him to die. Now a random woman just walks by and sees all of this, and is shocked to her core. First thing you gotta do is obviously take a picture, and then she calls the police. In the picture, you can see Takaoka on her phone, talking to God knows who, without a care in the world. Nobody does anything to stop her though, since they don't know what she's actually capable of. I mean, I would definitely not go near a girl sitting next to a grown man who's slowly acting like everything is sunshine and rainbows. And that brings us back to the beginning. Police arrive and arrest her, and she actually doesn't put up any sort of fight. While she's in the police car, you can literally see her smiling, like she enjoyed that stuff. Now comes probably the most obscure thing ever. Following this attack, Takaoka basically builds a huge following because she's somewhat attractive. Like, what? It's like the guy who ran over who ended up getting like edits made of him. She got fan art. People described her as too beautiful to be criminal and all of that. In December of 2019, she got 3.5 years in prison for attempted. Only 3 years for all of that. The good side is, Luna was able to recover from his heavy injuries. He regained consciousness 5 days after the attack, even though the doctor said that he only had a 20% chance of surviving. But obviously he wasn't able to talk, eat, walk, or do anything essentially for quite some time. But after recovering from all that, as far as I know, he actually came back to the industry. He still works in the same host bar, but it's like way more popular now since everybody knows his story. The one downside is that his liver doesn't work anymore, and so he can't drink alcohol, but he can probably live with that. And this guy's some kind of saint. Luna agreed to do an interview with some reporters, right? And he literally said that he fully forgives her for what she did. This guy's like an angel or something. Now let's talk about Takaoka. This all happened in 2019 and she got 3 years. Doing some basic maths and she's been out there. And she actually posts quite regularly on her Instagram, still doing cosplays and stuff like that. And she also streamed, like Pokemon and stuff. Junji Matsumoto was born in 1962 in, who'd have guessed, Japan. You could describe him as a typical introvert kind of nerd type of guy. He didn't really talk much, and when somebody asked him something in class, he would just straight up not respond or go to the bathroom as an excuse. He really was just in his own world for real. For example, one time in class, he was asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he just didn't say a word, probably just stared at the teacher. Later, when the classmate asked him in private what he wanted to do, he said he wanted to be a scientist, since he was pretty good at math and science. So he might have been a shy kid, but he at least had something going for him. He could focus on becoming a scientist and just live a normal life. Unfortunately, he would experience an episode of events that will lead him to kill both of his parents. After graduating high school, he secured a job for a little bit, but quit since he couldn't adjust to the workplace, probably because of his shyness or anxiety, and he just kind of stopped looking for jobs. Instead, he now spends most of his time watching anime, reading manga, and helping out at the liquor store that his mother runs, alongside his big bro. He has no sort of friends, and his family are really the only people he actually talks to. It's safe to say he doesn't really have any plan on what to do with his life, and he continues this exact lifestyle for 30 years. 30 years of watching anime, reading manga, and sometimes helping out at the store. And now comes the first unlucky event. His brother is hospitalized because of some sort of illness, which leaves Junji's mom and Junji to run the store now. But things just don't really work out after a while. Other corporations around the area slowly open up stores, Junji can't really operate things, and the parents are quite old now, so they decide to close the shop and retire. I mean, he's around 49 when this happens, so his parents are getting up there as well. Respect to the grind, but at one point you gotta hang it up, right? So they're both retired now, and his dad kinda runs the household since his wife is not physically able to do so. Here comes the second unfortunate event. On June 13th, 2021, Hirokazu, the dad, who's now in his 80s, just rides his bike when he gets into an accident. And you know how quickly older people can break bones and stuff. I mean, it's pretty crazy that he's even able to ride a bike at that age. But the father ends up being wheelchair bound nonetheless. With his brother hospitalized for 10 years now, and his dad being in a wheelchair, it is now fully Junji's responsibility to take care of his parents and the household. And he's overwhelmed. He suddenly has to attend to them 24/7. Every time they gotta go to the toilet, he has to help them. When they need to take a shower, he's gotta help them. And something like a retirement home is out of the question, since they do not have the funds to support that at all. Matter of fact, he uses the money that they saved up over the decades to buy the food and all that, since he hasn't had a job that actually paid him since he was 19. It really seems like a dead end. Now let's talk about the most unfortunate event. On June 20th, 2021, Junji was just watching his favorite anime. Probably like, my little sister can't be this cute. Enough with the jokes. This is really sad. He watches this anime to kind of escape reality for a bit, and his father asks him to help him to the toilet, as usual. But there's a really good scene happening right now, so Junji just tries to ignore him. His father really needs to go though, so he's kind of complaining and annoying him, if you can put it like that. He asks him over and over again, until Junji snaps. He's so fed up with his father that he grabs an electrical cord and just starts him. His dad kind of squirms around and tries to stop it, but Junji continues. And all that is left now is his father's soulless. Junji doesn't just live with his father though, right? His mother witnessed everything as well. So in his head, he needs to get rid of her too. He's now left with two in front of him. He grabs them and puts them into the big ass empty fridge that used to be part of the liquor store. He shoves them in there and just tapes the door shut. Jesus Christ, bro, this stuff is disturbing. After the adrenaline probably kind of wears off, he realizes that he had just become a criminal, even though he just wanted to watch his anime. He does not want to go to jail though, probably because he wouldn't be able to watch his anime, so he devises a plan to escape. After the incident, he calls off all appointments that his parents had. He calls off the rehab for his mother, and he postpones the visit of the welfare guys who would have come to the home to check up on them. On June 23rd, he takes all the credit cards of his parents and withdraws everything he can out of there, and then he leaves. There's a mix of him riding his bike and taking trains, but he essentially travels from one side of Japan to the other side, sleeping in different hotels, motels, whatever he could probably find. While he's gone, his relatives actually try calling them multiple times, but obviously nobody picks up, and so after a while of calling them, they call the police instead for a wellness check. They knew that Junji was under a lot of pressure and was kind of, closed off, not really the guy to talk and stuff. So on June 28th, the police checks up on them. Upon entering the house, they notice this weird stench coming from the fridge, and when they open it, they find this. This is a 3D model of how the were inside the fridge. Damn. So they find both of the parents, but they don't know where the last person is, Junji. I mean, in their heads, everything could have happened to him. He might have been kidnapped or also met the same fate as the parents. So they ask around. They interview the neighbors and stuff like that, and they all tell them Junji was kind of acting weird lately, and somebody spotted him riding his bike, and that leads to a nationwide search for him. The police looks at security camera footage, they ask hotels and all of that, and through that, they actually managed to track him down pretty easily. On July 4th, 2021, they find him in a hotel parking lot in Kyoto. They first arrest him for leaving corpses without reporting it or something, which you obviously should do, but he quickly admits that he was actually the one who them. And not gonna lie, this next part is just really depressing. During his trial, the prosecutor asks him about his family, and he basically describes how his mother suffered from a lumbar fracture. I don't know what that's either, but her back probably hurt so much that she said she didn't want to live anymore. And his father developed dementia in early 2021, and when he asked Junji to help him use the toilet, all that pent up frustration and pressure just exploded, and he didn't care about the repercussions of his actions. During that trial, there were also talks about him having a personality disorder, which made him so shy and isolated from everybody, but that didn't really change the result of the sentence. On the 6th of, I don't know to be honest, because the article doesn't say what 6th, but I'm guessing on the 6th of July, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison for alongside some other things. Tsutomu Miyazaki started off like almost every single person on this list. He was born in 1962 in Japan, and during his childhood he kept to himself a lot. He was bullied in school and didn't have a lot of friends, or any friends. And the reason for that is actually because of something entirely out of his control. He had a hand deformity which made his hand appear claw-like. I couldn't find a real close-up of his actual hand, since a lot of people use this picture, which doesn't even have anything to do with this case, but you can kind of see his hand right here. Because he was kind of an outcast, he spent a lot of time reading manga and watching anime, and like a lot of pubescent teenagers, he also dabbled in spicy content and horror movies as well. But as time went on, he gradually started watching more violent and graphic stuff, but I'll get there. Now, although Tsutomu was kind of a loner, from the outside it actually looked like his life was pretty nice. He was born into a wealthy family. They ran a newspaper business and they were actually quite well known in the area. Additionally, he was a straight A student. He attended a very prestigious high school and was basically a 5-star recruit, but for academics basically. He wanted to study English to become a teacher. Pretty wholesome so far. But of course the outside often does not reflect the inside. People flex designer stuff even though they're dead broke. And Tsutomu felt the same way, dead inside. His parents were always working. They put so much pressure on him to perform well in school. He still had no friends, and the only person he actually talked to was his grandfather, who was basically raising him. And all that just accumulates over time. You can tell that he started to show cracks when his grades dropped, and they dropped dramatically. He went from a rising star to rank 40 out of 56, which is pretty bad if you can't tell. Now, the high school he attended was connected to a university, so if you do well enough, you can just kind of transition and study the thing you want to study. In his case, English, right? But his grades dropped so low that he couldn't get in, so he had to attend a random local college instead, and decided to become a photography technician out of nowhere. And you really gotta remember these small details, because once I reach the end, all these little facts will have such a compounding effect. Tsutomu studied photography or whatever, and during this time, his obsession with weird media started growing. Apparently in college, he would take not so appropriate photos of female players on the tennis court and be an absolute fiend for spicy magazines. But according to him, they became boring after a while, since they black out the most important part. So he would go down the route of seeking more extreme stuff, such as media including people not of age. He really fell into the depths of full-fledged degeneracy. And this is only the beginning. At home, he still felt like nobody in his family really cared about his happiness or anything. They were only focused on material things and the business, which actually drove him to be quite depressed. And during that time, in the mid-1980s, so when he was in his 20s, he actually considered self-exiting. His grandfather managed to talk him out of that though. Unfortunately, in 1988, his grandfather would pass away. His only source of sincere human connection was gone now. The worst thing that could ever happen to him during this period happened. Simultaneously, his grandfather was probably the only one who kept Tsutomu's dark thoughts in check, so he had no person who would regulate him now. And considering that regulated means taking pictures of women, you can kinda guess where this leads. His change of personality was noticeable from the get-go. He began spying on his little sisters and attacked them when they confronted him. When his mother caught wind of it, she also said that he should watch less of his videotapes, that at this point contained increasingly more vile and graphic stuff. Like the anime and horror tapes definitely were not the mainstream type, let's put it this way. He wasn't watching My Neighbor Totoro, okay? And in order to feel closer to his grandpa, that he understandably very much missed, he would also eat some of his ashes. But as crazy as it sounds, the worst has yet to come. It's August 22nd, 1988, and Mari Kono, who's 4 at the time, is just playing at a friend's house, and Tsutomu takes notice of this girl. I would really love to say that he just went on with his day and all is good, but instead he decides to lure her in his black Nissan, and he drives off with Mari. He drives for a while and eventually parks the car under a bridge. For 30 minutes they just sit in the car and do nothing, until he decides to murder her, and does some unspeakable things after. When he's done, he dumps the near his house and lets it decompose, before keeping some parts as a trophy in his apartment. He then decides to send a box to Mari's family, including several teeth, grounded bones, and photos of clothing. And I think you can imagine who they belong to. This absolute psychopath also sends a postcard that reads, "Mari, bones, cremated, investigate, proof." This happens a total of 4 times. October 3rd, 1988, Tsutomu spots Masami Yoshizawa, who's 7 at the time. He offers Masami a ride, which she unfortunately accepts. He drives to the same place that he brought Mari to and her. He does the same unspeakable things to her, takes her clothes, and returns home. December 12th, 1988, Erika Namba plans to return home from a friend's house when Tsutomu kidnaps her. He her into his car and drives to a parking lot and takes pictures of her, of the inappropriate kind. Her was found 3 days later close to the parking lot. On December 20th, Namba's family also receive a postcard that reads, "Erika, cold, cough, throat, rest, death." June 6th, 1989. It's been almost an entire year now since his first victim, and he still has not been caught yet. Ayako Nomoto, age 5, is again just playing in the park when Tsutomu asks to take pictures of her. After doing so, because Ayako obviously doesn't think anything of it, she's 5 goddammit, he convinces her to get into his car where they could continue taking pictures. And again, he murders her. He does not let her rest though. He keeps her body in his apartment for the next 2 days and does unspeakable things until it starts to decompose. He also drinks her and eats parts of her. To make it even harder for all of the families of the victims, he would keep sending postcards describing what he did to them in detail and even call them regularly. When the families would pick up, they would just hear him breathing through the phone, not a single word being said. July 23rd, 1989, Tsutomu sees 2 sisters playing in the park, and he convinces the younger sister to go with him. Again, he starts taking pictures. But before this horrible cycle of suffering is able to continue, her father steps in and attacks Tsutomu. Luckily, her older sister who stayed behind ran to her dad to tell him what happened. Tsutomu was able to escape, but leaves his car behind. When he eventually returns, thinking that he's safe, he's finally arrested by the police, who waited there the entire time. But that is not the end just yet. When the police enter his apartment, they find a total of 5,763 videotapes, some containing anime, some containing horror movies, and some containing footage of his victims. Like the entire room was just filled with tapes. On March 30th, 1990, pretty much all of Japan knew who this man was, and it was a huge thing on the news. His dad, who apparently didn't know any of this beforehand, didn't bother to pay any kind of attorney to represent him, and his whole family obviously disowned him. During the trial, Tsutomu would really just yap. He blamed his alter ego for all the He called him the Rat Man. This is a picture he drew to describe him. Bro really just copied the Chuck E. Cheese costume. The thing is, under Japanese law, people who are in the state of like insanity where they commit their crimes aren't punished in the sense of going to prison. Instead, they would be sent to a medical facility or something similar. So it was really just a question of, was he actually insane or just pretending to be to get his sentence reduced? During the interrogation, he talked about how the Rat Man was always standing next to him. And before he killed one of the victims, 10 rat men would just appear, and once they were gone, the victim was dead. Like really just trying to seem like he was insane, which he obviously was to a degree, but he was definitely also fully aware of what he did. There were 3 teams of expert psychiatrists analyzing him, I guess, and they all came to different conclusions. One deemed him as schizophrenic, the other team said that he had multiple personality disorder, and the third team said that he might have had a personality disorder, but was still capable of his actions, making him fully responsible. And the court ended up deciding in favor of the last team. And so on April 14, 1997, he was sentenced to death, but he was actually hanged in 2008. And last but not least, let's talk about the gaming community. People who thought that video games are like real life. Edward Kang was one of the few people who still played the game ArcheAge, an MMORPG that was first released in 2013. It was an open world fantasy roleplay game, where players could explore different continents and fight each other. It was one of those games where people could truly live a second life. Over time though, the game became less and less popular due to various reasons. But just a few days before the game was officially shut down in the US, Edward logged into the game to enjoy its last remaining days. In one of these last moments, Edward encounters another player online. Let's call this person Blank. And with every game that has a chat function, they get into an argument. It's not known what they talked about in detail, but Blank seems to really tick off Edward. And instead of just logging off and reporting him, Edward decides to take matters into his own hands. He proceeds to find Blank's exact physical address and plans his revenge. On June 21st, Edward tells his family that he's gonna visit a longtime friend he met online, and flies from Jersey over to Florida. He arrives at approximately 2 AM Friday and checks into the Ocean Coast Hotel. But before heading to bed, Edward buys a hammer and a flashlight from the local hardware store. The day after, he decides to execute his plan. He waits until Saturday night and enters Blank's home. Blank doesn't hear any sort of break-in since he actually left the door unlocked. And during his late night gaming session, he decides to go to the toilet. When he turns the corner, he suddenly sees a man with only black attire, gloves, and a mask, with a big hammer raised in midair, just waiting to strike. Blank's stepfather also slept in the same house, and he suddenly wakes up because he hears some loud screaming, and he rushes over, only to find his stepson and Edward fighting. Edward had struck Blank with his hammer, but they were now wrestling on the ground. His stepfather steps in, and both of them combined are able to overwhelm Edward and restrained him until the police arrived at around 2 AM the next day. Blank had severe head trauma and had to be rushed to the hospital. Edward ended up being charged with attempted second-degree unaliving, and when he was questioned on why he did all of that, Edward just answered with, "He is a bad person online." If you think Edward's planning was excessive, Julian will blow your mind. It's the beginning of 2010. Julien Béraud is 20 years old and turns his computer on to play a few rounds of CSGO, one of, if not the most popular shooter game of all time. But in one of these matches, instead of using virtual and fake guns to fight each other, the whole lobby decides to do a knife-only round, meaning nobody's allowed to use their guns but only their knives. Makes sense, right? Julien agrees and eventually encounters his first enemy, somebody named Mikael. Julien loses the fight against him, which is quite normal in a video game. But for him, this defeat feels different. It makes him angry, very angry, and he wants revenge, but not in CSGO. For 6 months straight, he works on finding Mikael's exact location, doing everything in his might to make up for his loss during that one round that is now ingrained in his mind. And he eventually finds him. It turns out he lives pretty close to his own home in northern France, so it's settled. Julien grabs a knife in real life and travels to his house. Once he's in front of that stranger's place, he knocks on the door, and Mikael, who thinks nothing of it, answers. The moment Julien sees the door swing open, he starts attacking him, and he does the same thing that happened to him in CSGO, and stabs him in his chest with the intention of erasing him forever. After he feels satisfied, he quickly flees the scene. But within the hour, Julien is arrested by the police, and he gets the devastating message that he missed Mikael's heart by barely an inch. The wound was severe, but he lived. Julian ends up receiving a very lenient punishment of only 2 years in prison. The next person did not get such a lenient punishment though, and there's a reason why. It's 2004. Chu Changwei is a 41-year-old man, and he spends most of his time playing the game Legend of Mir 3, which used to be a very popular MMORPG in Asia. The game is kinda like RuneScape, which will also be the focus of the next story actually. He either plays alone or teams up with his online friend Zhu Xiaoyang, who is 26. They kind of know each other in real life since they live in the same city of Shanghai, but their friendship pretty much only exists within the game. One of the rarest and most valuable items in Legend of Mir 3 is the so-called Dragon Saber, a sword type item that has a very slim chance to drop from bosses or dungeons. It's one of those things that only high level players can even dream of owning. Naturally, Chu, Zhu and everyone else were actively grinding to get this sword, which means either buying it off a marketplace for real life money or investing hundreds of hours into the game just for a slim chance to hold it one day. Well, Zhu and a friend grind dungeons for a long time and eventually manage to acquire the Dragon Saber, and they make a pact to share the item between themselves. Zhu eventually hears of the great news, and he asks Zhu if he could borrow the item just for a while to see what it's like to have one. Zhu has generally been a trustworthy person and friend of him, and so he agrees and lends him what could only be described as one of Zhu's biggest achievements of all time within the game. Hundreds of hours of playtime that translated to that one item that is now in the inventory of Zhu, and he goes around the map to try it out. All is well. Zhu actually logs off for the day, and while Zhu is alone with the sword, he gets a very dangerous thought. Remember when I said that people were selling the Dragon Saber online? Well, it was selling on eBay for ridiculous amounts of money, and he could use some right now. And so he decides to sell his friend's item for 7,200 yuan, which is around $872. That's the equivalent to like a month of working. Zhu eventually returns to the game as usual and asks Zhu for his sword back, but Zhu doesn't have it anymore. He tells his friend that he sold it. Zhu is speechless. He was betrayed by his own friend, and it wasn't even the person who grinded with him to acquire the sword. He's furious. He doesn't know what to do, but with the little self-restraint that he still has, he goes to the police to let them handle it. But they only laugh, since it's not technically a crime, it's just a video game after all. Zhu presses Zhu one last time, and he promises that he will pay him the money that he got from the sale, but Zhu loses patience, and with all the hate growing in his heart, he decides to pay a visit to Zhu's apartment complex. It's the early morning when he breaks into the apartment with a knife in his hand. Zhu is still sleeping when he abruptly wakes up hearing some loud noise. He tries to put on his pants when suddenly Zhu starts out of seemingly nowhere, and Zhu actually passes away. And having done what he wanted to do, Zhu actually turns himself to the police and pleads guilty to intentionally teleporting his friend from this earth. And just like that, Zhu threw his life away because of some item in-game. Revenge isn't the only thing that drove these gamers to do these horrible things though. The next person genuinely saw life as a video game. June 7, 2003. Devin Moore, who is 18 at the time, is brought into the Fayette police station for stealing a car. He doesn't have any type of previous criminal history and acts pretty friendly and is very calm and collected. Officer Arnold Strickland starts going through the usual process, takes his fingerprints and personal information. It seems like one of those cases where a nice, normal guy made some bad decisions, but that's pretty much it. When everything seemed normal, out of nowhere, Devin decides to lunge at Officer Strickland, and he grabs the dangerous device that police normally has on them, and he aims at the officer and triggers twice, one of them hitting the officer in the head area. Another officer, James Crumb, hears the loud noise and responds. He meets Moore in the hallway, and again, Moore pew-pews another 3 times, one hitting the officer fatally again. It seems like Devin has been doing this his entire life. No ordinary person could pull off such an act without any prior experience with such a dangerous device. That is not the end though. Moore continues to run down the hallway, towards the door where the emergency dispatchers are. He's like a completely different person from only a few minutes ago. And again, he does the same thing to another person, Ace Miller, one of the emergency dispatchers. And he lives the world of the living too by Devin's hand. Devin then decides to leave the station by stealing a police car and driving away. This situation turned from an arrest for stealing a car to one of the most disturbing cases in history. In a matter of minutes, a manhunt was quickly launched to capture him, and he's actually arrested again the same day in Mississippi, about 16 miles away from the scene. When he's brought back into the station, he just tells the police that life is like a video game. Everybody's got to leave this plane of existence sometime. 2 of the 3 families of the victims file a lawsuit, but not against Devin, but Sony and Rockstar Games. Yes, the company, because the game GTA Vice City allegedly played a crucial role in how Devin acted. Devin had apparently played that game, most likely quite excessively, and had been trained and brainwashed to do all of these vile actions by the game. And when he was in the same situation as in the game, he had the same ideas: steal the car, run away, and end these officers, because there's a mission in GTA where you have to do exactly that. This was a very controversial lawsuit and statement. Did video games really influence him that much? Or was there some other factor that nobody knew of? Nonetheless, the lawsuit against these companies ultimately did not succeed, and it didn't influence the outcome of his trial. On October 9, 2005, Devin is sentenced to the worst possible outcome. He meets the same fate as the police officers, but by lethal injection instead. Now, this wasn't the only case of complete delusion. Shane Coffey is a 14-year-old kid who lives in Massachusetts, USA. He's extremely introverted and shy, to the point where he isn't even able to buy stuff on his own if it means going into the outside world and talking to strangers. His family situation isn't much better, to be honest. They themselves said that they had serious issues with alcohol and substances. So as a result of this kind of harsh childhood, Shane spends most of his time playing video games such as RuneScape, the largest and most updated free MMORPG in existence. It's the way for him to talk to people without having to physically stand in front of them. He can just type and message, or if he's comfortable enough, talk to them over a call. Like a lot of normal teenage boys, he also uploads a few videos on YouTube. The video that is still up today has reached well over 100,000 views, which is seriously impressive considering it was 2007. And he even used to have other videos online that had over 500,000 views. While playing RuneScape, Shane eventually meets a girl named Farah. They're both around the same age, and they start chatting quite frequently, and they quickly become friends. Whether it's on RuneScape or Skype, they would talk for hours on end, and this goes on for years. The relationship started off as friends, but some of the messages they exchanged were kind of flirty, and so it's safe to say Shane develops feelings for Farah, and she kind of becomes his first romantic interest. And as time passed, Shane started showing more and more of his obsessive side. He convinces Farah to download a file that was supposedly a game that he wanted them to play together. But instead of just downloading a normal video game, Farah unknowingly downloads a keylogger, which is a software that basically records all of your keyboard's input. It can be used for helpful and normal reasons, but they're more known for stealing private information such as usernames, passwords, etc. Shane wanted none of that though. Instead, he wanted to see if Farah was texting other boys online, which would make him extremely jealous. A bit of time passes, with the keylogger recording every single message Farah types and sends out, and Shane finds out the hurtful truth. She was indeed talking to other people. Now, they were never officially boyfriend and girlfriend or anything, since they only talked on Skype and RuneScape. And additionally, Shane lived in the US while Farah lived in England. So talking to other people didn't actually violate any type of boundaries. But nonetheless, Shane freaks out and they get into a huge argument. And so Farah decides to block him on everything. She cuts ties with Shane for 2 entire years, and she just kinda moves on, while Shane is still obsessed with her. It's November 2013 now, and both Farah and Shane are young adults. Shane decides to contact Farah again, and apologizes for all of the disturbing things he did. And Farah actually accepts his apology, which would turn out to be a very, very bad idea. Their relationship actually turns more and more flirty, romancy, and kind of serious, I guess. since they both actually share their address to each other, so they can send each other Christmas gifts. And Shane goes all out. He buys her a brand new Xbox with various games, which is a big purchase for an 18-year-old. But Shane is happy nonetheless. He rekindled his relationship with Farah and they're closer than ever. There's pretty much nothing stopping them from becoming a full-fledged, long-distance couple. Until Farah messages him on Christmas Eve. Her family is fully Muslim, and with her being 18, her parents told her that she could only marry a Muslim man, which Shane isn't. And so she tells him that they can't maintain this online relationship they have, but she wants to stay friends instead. Shane couldn't accept that fact. He was fully in love with her, and so he messaged her every day asking to get back with him, but also to return the Xbox that he gave her if she only wanted to be friends. This continues until February of 2014. When Farah's limit is reached and she decides to block him again on all social medias, telling him to get out of her life. Shane is all alone. It's the second time he's been blocked now, and instead of apologizing, he has a much more disturbing and sinister idea. He books a flight to the UK in February, as well as a stay at a hotel that is only around 20 minutes away from Farah's house. And in the middle of April, he takes the flight. He lands at the Heathrow airport on April 17 with a smuggled combat knife that he somehow got through customs, alongside cable ties and tape. He first takes a taxi to his hotel and then decides to walk past her house, most likely just to get used to the area before executing his plan. And on April 18th at 3 AM, he goes to her house with the knife he brought. He sneaks around and actually finds a spot where he can see Farah through her window, and he just waits. He waits for an entire hour for her to fall asleep, and around 4:30 AM, she turns off her lights. Shane jumps into action, and he grabs a brick from the garden and smashes the window of her room. Farah wakes up, not knowing what she just heard, but before she could even assess the situation, Shane approaches her and does crazy things. Farah lets out bone-chilling screams due to the pain, which eventually wakes up her brother, Muhammad. He rushes over to see what's going on, and he starts attacking Shane immediately. He rips him off the bed, and they start fighting over the knife. Muhammad himself gets multiple times and starts screaming too. But with the help of their father, who jumped in as well now, Muhammad actually manages to grab an iron pipe and hits Shane on the head 3 times before he drops the and says, "Stop, enough, I'm done." A few minutes later, the police arrive and Shane is arrested, and both Muhammad and Farah are rushed to the hospital to get their injuries treated. Even though both make decent recoveries, Muhammad's hands are actually never able to fully heal back, making it a lot harder to use his computer and such. And the police searches all of Shane's electronics, and they find out that he's been actually searching stuff like how to use a for combat, what is life like in UK prisons. And during the court trial, Shane actually blamed his actions on the voices in his head and his very troubled background. But he ended up being sentenced to life in prison, with a chance of parole after 8 years. If you think this one was bad, yeah, the next one is even worse. Like, way worse. Daniel Petrie was born in 1997 in Brazil, and pretty much his entire life, he was considered a problem child. He was very rebellious and had serious anger issues. They got to the point where his parents were genuinely afraid of him. Because of these problems, his parents got him to visit multiple psychiatrists, but he refused to talk during the sessions and always acted out. So after visiting a couple of times, he stopped going. He was 16 at the time he stopped. And this is also the year he took an entirely innocent person's. Due to his mental problems, he drops out of school entirely and starts isolating himself from his parents and the entire world essentially. He's only in his room, watching movies and playing video games. And he eventually discovers the game Tibia, a multiplayer online RPG type of game released in 1997, but it actually reached its peak in 2007, the year this case went down. After playing for a while, Daniel meets another player, Gabriel Kuhn. Gabriel is a 12-year-old kid who also lives in Brazil, and they kinda become online buddies. But not just that actually. It turns out they live in the same neighborhood, Santa Catarina. So after playing for hours in the game, Daniel actually also sometimes comes over and visits Gabriel in real life. Gabriel's mother kind of got a bad vibe from Daniel, but despite that, she let them play together and lets him visit their house with no issues. And they actually become pretty good friends, both offline and in-game. It's around July when Gabriel asks Daniel to borrow 20,000 gold coins to buy an item, and he promises to pay him back a few days later. Daniel agrees, since they're both buddies, and it's not like he's just giving away money, but he's just lending them out, right? These coins I'm talking about were a non-premium in-game currency, so 20k of gold coins would translate to around $2 in real-life money. So not a lot, even back then. A couple of days pass, and Daniel asks Gabriel if he can get the coins back, since he promised to do so. And this is where Gabriel unfortunately makes a huge mistake. He refuses to pay him back, and eventually even blocks him. Daniel is a very unstable guy, who we know has had anger outbursts. And this was just another reason for him to blow up. And so he plans to get his revenge, no matter what it takes. On July 27th, he first calls the mother of Gabriel, and after talking for a bit, he finds out that she's actually not at home right now, but Gabriel is, and he's the only one in the house. And so knowing that, Daniel visits him, like he's done multiple times, but this time he visits him for a different reason. Daniel now stands in front of Gabriel's house, and Gabriel is kinda hesitant to open the door, since he just kinda scammed him out of 20k gold coins and blocked him. But Daniel convinces Gabriel to let him in, and he tells him that he's only here to iron things out and everything would be fine if he just apologized. But that could not be further from the truth. Once he's inside, Daniel locks the door behind him and he immediately starts attacking Gabriel. Gabriel tries to defend himself, but you gotta imagine, Daniel is 16. 6'3" and 208 pounds, while Gabriel doesn't even come close, so it's a pretty one-sided fight. Daniel then eventually drags him over to the bed and does unspeakable things to him. And once Daniel finishes what he's been doing, he starts laughing like a psychopath. Gabriel thinks the nightmare's over. This was his gruesome punishment. And so he tries to fight back just a tiny bit by threatening to tell his mother what he did to him once she comes back. And after Daniel hears that, whatever has been holding him back all this time completely shatters. He grabs a cable from Gabriel's computer and holds it tightly in his hands and does unspeakable things until he leaves the earth. At least that's what Daniel thinks. So he's now got Gabriel in front of him and he tries to hide him, but Gabriel is way too heavy to move him around. And so in order to properly hide him from the police and his mother, he decides to grab a kitchen and a hacksaw, and he starts doing things. I'm not gonna go into detail, but you can kinda imagine what I mean, right? In the middle of that, Gabriel actually regains consciousness. He was alive this entire time, but unfortunately, Daniel doesn't stop at all. He actually starts going faster and faster, fully enjoying it. And after a while, Gabriel goes into shock. Even after Daniel was done, he wasn't able to hide Gabriel like he planned to do so, and so he just kinda got bored for whatever reason. So once more he does unspeakable things and then flees the scene. Eventually Gabriel's brother returns home and finds a disturbing scene. He drops to his knees and starts screaming for their mother, which catches the attention of the neighborhood, and they eventually call the police after finding out what happened. And the police links everything back to Daniel, which leads to his arrest shortly after. Daniel admits to everything, but he doesn't show an ounce of remorse, and even says Gabriel was a coward and a thief. He burns in hell right now, where I sent him, and when I pass, I will find him in hell and finish my revenge. We're talking about somebody who stole a couple of in-game coins, and Daniel acts like Gabriel is the monster here. Now, due to Brazil's law regarding minors, Daniel was sentenced to 3 years in juvenile detention. 3 years. Let that sink in. He was released in 2010 and no one knows where he's at, what he's doing, or if he's even still alive. The next person I'm going to be talking about also suffered from serious anger issues, but the casualties were far worse. David Katz had a very rough childhood for sure. Even though his family was pretty well off, his father was a NASA engineer and his mother a toxicologist, there were a lot of problems he had to deal with. He was a child of divorce and it was a very, very traumatic time. for everybody. According to police records, there were 26 calls for service to the police from the home of the family in Maryland from 1993 to 2009. And the issues really ranged from mental illness to domestic disputes. David also suffered from serious mental health issues that included persistent depressive disorder, which is a continuous long-term form of depression, and ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, which is defined as a pattern of angry, irritable mood, which resulted in him getting prescribed a lot of medication, including medication that was used to treat schizophrenia, for example. So from an early age of 12, he already had serious anger issues that resulted in erratic and emotional outbursts. And over the years, he went through a number of psychiatrists, social workers, and therapists to try to help him control these problems. But even within the family, there were arguments about what kind of treatment would help David the most. His father didn't want David to use so much medication and instead wanted him to attend a support group since he never saw any signs of schizophrenia in him, while his mother disagreed. Now, how exactly did these mental issues actually affect his life? The day after his 13th birthday, for example, the police were called about David from his own family since he began shouting at his mother and grandmother and behaved very disrespectful towards them. A 2006 court filing also stated that a therapist said that David had experienced a psychiatric crisis, and so he was involuntarily committed to mental hospitals multiple times. This kind of behavior continued throughout high school and even college, where he still attended therapy sessions, but with minimal improvements. The people around him noticed that once he got upset, he would truly become a different person and act out like no one has seen before. Just to give you an example, he once punched a hole in the door of his mom's bedroom after being angry. So he wasn't a stable person by any means, that's for sure, which would later unfortunately lead to casualties of more than a dozen people. Now, even though all of this was going on, he still actually had one thing going for him: video games. Throughout his childhood, he played a lot of them, like excessively. According to his own mother, she often had to confiscate his video games since he would go for days without taking a shower, washing his hair, or taking care of himself in general. And when she took away his console, he would just walk in circles for hours around the house, doing nothing. But eventually, he would find one video game that he'd excel at: Madden NFL. He would spend hundreds of hours playing this game and actually make a name for himself within the community. He was known as Ravens Champ and Drex Have a Heart Attack, but he was mostly known as Brett. He was actually so good that in 2007, he won $10,000 in a Madden tournament and also a place at the Madden Club Series Championship in California. Now, he did lose in the quarterfinals, but nonetheless, that was an impressive achievement. However, just a year later, things would take a turn for the worse. David enters another tournament, competing in the Madden NFL 19 qualifier in Florida, with over 130 participants and people watching from all over the world, since everything was going to be live streamed on Twitch. He attends the tournament and plays a few games. But on August 27, 2018, during the second day of the event, he unfortunately loses a round. Now, it's not like he was some undefeated player, right? He's probably lost plenty of times in his life. But this time, for whatever reason, he behaves differently because of his loss. He refuses to shake the hand of the winner, and his behavior in general seems kind of unsettled. He acts very withdrawn all of a sudden, and he's visibly angry while his face remains cold. He then decides to leave the tournament completely. He just kind of storms out. But despite that, the tournament continues. It's probably not the first time that somebody who's lost was visibly upset during an esports event. So while another game goes on, David returns to the venue, but this time with a certain dangerous device. And he decides to point and trigger it 12 entire times. He first specifically targets one person, Elijah Clayton, a 22-year-old who was also a professional gamer known as True or True Boy. They never really liked each other, and according to acquaintances of both of them, they had a history of animosity and a bit of beef, you could say. And so he was his first target, which resulted in Elijah leaving this earth. And after that, David turns around and just starts hurting random people who were at the wrong place at the wrong time. One of them being 27-year-old Taylor Robinson, who was also a professional player known as Spot Me Please. And he too passed away. In total, he injures more than a dozen people before doing the same thing to himself. And All of this was live streamed, as I already mentioned, so you could literally hear everything that was going on, which is even more disturbing. Now, I've talked about a lot of disturbing gamers, but this one, yeah, this one just kinda hits different. Maroon Ayub wakes up, grabs his phone and just checks his Discord notifications, as one does. But instead of seeing random memes or unimportant messages, he reads something much more disturbing. I just my entire family, and most likely will spend my life in jail if I manage to survive. I hope I made you laugh at one point or another. I hope you remember the good times. I will miss you all. This has to be a troll, right? Manas, the person who sent this message, was kinda quirky, but mostly normal. He's gotta be joking, right? I just woke up. It's the only thing Ayub can come up with to this very weird message. But Manas doesn't drop the act and sends multiple disturbing pictures of what can only be described as people on the ground, seemingly not on this earth anymore. These messages were a result of a plethora of very unfortunate events. And to truly understand the situation, I'll go back to where it all began. Monroe Zaman and his wife Momtaz Zaman shared one single dream. They wanted to build a better life for themselves and eventually their children. They wanted more opportunities, more freedom, and achieving that in their home countries of India and Bangladesh would prove to be very difficult. And so they eventually decide to migrate to Toronto, Canada to hopefully achieve this very dream. Once they officially settled, just 6 years later, they give birth to their first son, Manas Zaman. And they also have a daughter just 2 years later, who they named Melissa. The rules of the house were very simple. Work hard and you'll get rewarded. Father Munarus himself was a taxi driver and worked all day to provide for his family. He was so good, matter of fact, that he received Employee of the Month rewards multiple times. The mother was also loved within the neighborhood and worked on properties while taking care of the household and cooking for the entire family. Now naturally, this kind of hard-working mentality would also be expected of their children. They should study hard, get their degrees, and eventually work a well-paying job, so they won't have to go through all the struggles their parents had to go through when growing up. Monarus and Momtaz just wanted them to live better lives than they did. Now this might sound good and nice on paper, but the reality is often a lot darker than what meets the eye. Although Melissa wanted to become a neurosurgeon, which was one of those career paths her parents gladly accepted, she didn't adopt all of their values and ideas. She performed very well academically, but often rebelled against her parents because she didn't have a lot of freedom and was supposed to only focus on her future career. So in response, she would sneak out, she would drink and party, and just try to live her teenage years not locked up in a house. Her mother, but most importantly her father, would be pretty strict about that sort of stuff. And to punish her, when she was outside during the night, he would just kinda lock the doors so she couldn't get inside and would be forced to sleep in the cold. Her mother would eventually secretly open the door again, but that didn't fix the core problem. These inherent issues between Melissa and her dad would escalate to a point where the neighbors would call the police out of concern, since the arguments would get super loud. And for the first son, Manas, well, he was gonna become a successful engineer. At least that's what his parents told him to do. He didn't have a lot of say in the matter, but it was just kinda expected. And this put a lot of pressure on Manas. Imagine your parents telling you that they're working 50, 60 hours a week just to provide for you, so you can focus on studying and becoming an engineer, even though that's not really your dream. Now Manas was more of a shy, kinda introverted kid, so he didn't actively rebel against that decision. Instead, he would try to run from his problems by playing video games to escape all this pressure just for a while. And the game of his choice? Perfect World, a Chinese 3D fantasy MMORPG where you can be whoever you want to be and do whatever you want. You had true freedom and nobody expected anything of you. The perfect escape. He would practically play this game every single minute he was able to do so and talk to his online friends within the game. But his family didn't care about that. They wanted to see him study and succeed. And so because of that pressure, Manas comes home and tells his parents that he had just been accepted into the York University's mechanical engineering program. His family is extremely happy and all of their wishes and dreams are now slowly becoming a reality. Yeah, well, no, Manas was lying. In reality, his grades were horrible, and instead of attending a very prestigious university, he actually just started attending a random community college that he didn't tell his parents about. It was just a way for him to kind of get them off his back for a while. But even though this might have worked in the short term, this plan was destined to backfire horribly from the start. As time passed, Manas experienced more and more pressure. His family was telling everybody how their son was going to be an engineer, and the only person who shared this kind of pressure with him, his sister, actually moved out. She escaped and decided to live with her boyfriend after probably another argument that broke out between her and her father. But in return, she left her brother behind. Manas was now supposed to carry all of these high expectations. He was their only hope, so there was more pressure on him than ever before, which just resulted in him returning to his only way of escape. He started playing Perfect World, even more now, becoming completely indulged. Manas played on a special server within Perfect World that had a nice little community that he connected with quite well. He made friends and would talk to them regularly over the Discord server they had. It was his own little safe space. A safe space that started a vicious cycle for him. The thing is, he would play Perfect World and his grades would slip. And to cope with that, he would play even more and his grades would get even worse. And eventually, it came to a point where he started failing his classes. And so he decides to drop out entirely. Not only was their golden child not gonna be an engineer, but he wouldn't even finish community college. The only thing Manas did now was just play Perfect World. And to continue this illusion in front of his parents, he would literally drive to campus, set up his laptop, play Perfect World, and then return home to play even more. And this is the point it all falls apart. His first cracks would show when he would chat to his online friends and make these comments about quitting the game for good, because he might go to jail soon. Sound familiar? His friends found it a bit weird, but didn't think of it as anything serious, since people online sometimes act a bit more extreme, and Manas specifically was kinda known for being a bit more edgy. But these comments just wouldn't stop, and he would just become more and more extreme with them, now even making jokes about certain groups in very aggressive ways. And this results in a ban that would last several weeks. And Manas realizes something. It's been 4 years now since he first lied about studying mechanical engineering, and he's supposed to graduate soon. His parents ask him about it, and he tells them that the graduation ceremony was gonna be on July 28th. A date that would change the gaming community forever. The day slowly comes closer and closer, but at least Manas is actually able to return to his Perfect World community, and he continues with his kinda disturbing comments. He would now talk about wanting to leave this earth and just speak about himself in a very degrading manner. But as he was now literally known as the weird guy making comments to catch attention, nobody really batted an eye anymore. Around this time, his sister actually reunites with their parents and decides to move back in order to rekindle their relationship and the time they lost. And she actually starts attending York University to study there. From the outside, it looks like the family is a whole again. Son and daughter are both studying at a prestigious university and they're just doing well in general. But Manas knows the truth. This is all just a facade that is just waiting to be exposed. On July 27th, just a day before the supposed graduation ceremony was taking place, all of the family members head to work. His father is about to start his taxi session, his mom goes to handle the properties, and his sister heads to her part-time job at a grocery store, while Manas is at home just kinda thinking. And around 3 PM, his mother returns and goes upstairs to take a nap with her mother, aka Manas' grandmother, who also lives there. And knowing that tomorrow was gonna be the day of the ceremony, he decides to do something incredibly disturbing. He goes inside his mother's room and strikes with a crowbar before her. I won't go into detail, but once he finishes his job, he goes back down and literally opens Discord and sends messages similar to the one in the beginning to the group Discord, as well as pictures. He then goes upstairs again and repeats the same thing with his grandmother. Then goes downstairs again and sends similar messages, including pictures. No, I unalived mom and granny so far, waiting for sister in 5 minutes, then dad in an hour. At this point, people inside the Perfect World Discord were genuinely concerned. Was this actually real? some decide to reverse image search the images, and they literally find no picture online. And just a few minutes later, he sends a disturbing picture of his sister. They're absolutely sure now. Manas wasn't kidding about this, but nobody knows where he lives, so they can't help. He never revealed his full government name, what city he was even in, or any personal information, except what he looks like. And so an hour later, his father returns, who meets the same unfortunate outcome. And he just doesn't stop sending messages and photos. He says stuff like, "I'm a pathetic coward and a human. Since I'm atheist, I believe there's no afterlife. So I was scared to and I wanted them to so that they didn't suffer knowing how much of a pathetic human I was. It's all very selfish. I'm just pathetic." After hours of painful work to find Manas' whereabouts, one user actually manages to grab his IP address, and they pinpoint his location to Toronto. They decide to call the police, including all the details, and it was now just a waiting game. Meanwhile, the guys on the Discord server try to distract him from doing anything even worse, and ask him stuff like, "What will you do with the rest of your time now?" At this point, the action is done. Eat junk food, visit my ex-girlfriend, drink, smoke. I've never drank alcohol or a cigarette. But 12 hours after the incident, Manas sends us 2 final messages. "The police are here. Goodbye." Officers were able to locate him by talking to internet providers and giving them the IP address, and they were now standing in front of his house. Manas goes downstairs and opens the door, and once the police actually went inside, they find the rest of the family members, exactly how Manas described them in the messages. Manas is arrested, and during his interrogation, he seems completely calm, unfazed, telling how everything went down without any regret. And the story ends with him being charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder. The next person also did horrible things to his parents, but not because of any family pressure, but because of a shooter game. This story takes place in a city in Ohio, with barely 5,000 people living there. You'd expect the biggest drama to be some random church thing that happened, but unfortunately it gets a lot messier. Meet the Patricks. Mark and Susan Patrick were the parents of Heidi and Holly, as well as the main focus, Daniel. They were the typical religious suburban family. Mark worked as a Pentecostal minister at the New Life Assembly of God, which is a Protestant charismatic Christian movement that emphasizes direct personal experience of God through baptism with the Holy Spirit. So yeah, pretty religious job. And as for Susan, she worked for Weber's Healthcare part-time, which is a nursing home, and also looked over the children. They both went to the Valley Forge Christian College in Pennsylvania, where they actually met and became a thing, having been married for over 20 years now. But that's enough about the parents. Let's talk about Daniel. He was 16 at the time, born in 1991, and his family and friends actually described him as a pretty normal and happy teenager, which is unexpected if we think about all the other guys I covered so far. They were all very closed off and kinda shy. According to his father, he had a very healthy and loving relationship with his family, and his classmates also described him as a very friendly and fun person to be around. Like the rest of the family, he was also very passionate about God, since he attended church every Sunday of course, and talked about the Bible quite enthusiastically. He really couldn't be more normal, if I can put it like that. In school, he didn't get in trouble or anything, and his grades were pretty average. He just didn't stand out in any type of way. Nothing would hint to the fact that he would later commit such an incredibly disturbing crime. Here comes the first twist. Daniel gets an infection from a skiing injury and is housebound for an entire year. He can still kind of leave the house, but should not overexert himself, so the spinal damage that he got could slowly heal. So all of this meant a lot of TV and video games. I mean, he couldn't play outside, and so what else was there to do? Because he spends more and more time playing games and watching TV, his friend Jonathan actually introduces him to the video game that everybody's talking about right now, Halo. For any of y'all who haven't played the game, Halo is essentially a shooter that was massively popular more than a decade ago. You essentially play as this guy named Master Chief and shoot random aliens that you come across. And you're kind of fighting for the survival of the human race. Most of the Halo games are rated M for mature, which plays a very important role for the story. but we'll get there. Daniel slowly falls in love with the game. Now, due to his religious beliefs and values, he never really played any games that contained a lot of violence, but he was 16 and it was just really fun to play. And he doesn't just love the game, but he actually becomes addicted to it in quite the short amount of time. He plays 7 or even 8 hours a day at Johnson's house. That is like a full-time job. Eventually, Daniel asked his father if he could buy a copy of Halo for himself, since he didn't want to be at Johnson's house every time he wanted to play. But Mark says no, he doesn't want Daniel to consume this kind of violent media. He thinks that it just isn't good for him, and the fact that he played so excessively did not help his case. And his father decides to double down and draw the line right here, before it escalates. They get into a bit of an argument, and his father tells him that he won't buy the game for him and that he should stop playing violent games altogether. Either that, or he can just move out the house. And as Daniel's obsession with the game is now gradually taking over his entire life, he decides to leave. He calls Johnson's house his new home. And now that he doesn't have any parents disturbing him, they play up to 18 hours a day together, with little to no breaks. Halo takes over Daniel's life completely. No Bible studies, no hanging out with friends outside of Halo. He just wants to shoot aliens now. This twisted dream only lasts a couple of days though, as Johnson's parents actually become quite concerned about him and ask Daniel to move back to his actual home. And since Johnson's house was kind of his only shelter, he gives in. He moves back to his parents' house. But that doesn't mean that Daniel will just magically stop playing the game. So one night, he sneaks out of the house and goes to his local GameStop to buy the game behind his parents' back. But when he returns, he gets caught by his dad. Mark is furious. What has happened to his son? He used to listen to him. He used to be a normal teenager, but it seems like he's a shell of what he once was now. A huge argument breaks out and Mark confiscates the game and puts it into a safe that also had a 9mm for self-defense, and he closes it. He hides the key in a secret location that nobody but him and his wife would know of, and he hopes that this would finally settle things. Daniel would have no choice but to look for other ways to pass the time. This was a week before he used the self-defense device on his parents. October 20th, 2007 is a Saturday, and the family plans some wholesome weekend family activities. The older daughter Heidi and her husband are gonna come over to watch the football game together. And the day passes like every other Saturday. But Daniel has other plans in mind. And around 7 p.m, he walks into the living room to talk to his parents. Mark and Susan are just sitting on the couch. And he says, "Would you close your eyes? I have a surprise for you." Now, this was kinda weird. Daniel was in a crappy mood ever since his game was confiscated. But now it seems like he's suddenly brimming with excitement. Did he actually get over his addiction? And so both Mark and Susan close their eyes. Daniel walks behind his father. It is eerily silent for a while. And the next thing that Mark hears is a deafening click that shatters the silence within a split second. That was the surprise. Daniel found the keys to the safe and took both Halo 3 and the self-defense device with him. He then does the same thing 4 times to his mother. And after Daniel thought that his job was finished, he places the device in his father's hand to make it seem like Mark did all of this instead of him. And he literally says, "Hey Dad, here's your device. Take it." A few minutes later, Daniel's sister Heidi and her husband unexpectedly arrived to watch the game together. But they actually came 2 hours earlier than planned, which Daniel did not take into account. In a slight panic, he tells them to not go inside the house under any circumstances. He lies to them by saying that Mark and Susan are fighting right now. But Heidi doesn't believe him. I mean, she knows her parents, right? She then hears a distant groaning from inside the house, and so she decides to push Daniel aside and enter. This is when Daniel takes the self-defense device and is about to repeat history once again. But before he's able to do that, her husband, Andrew Archer, quickly snatches the device from him, and Daniel doesn't resist. All of them now stand before the terrible aftermath of Daniel's actions, and Heidi immediately calls the police.
What's going on?
I don't know what happened. I just came over to my parents' house because we were going to watch the game, and my mom is and my dad is and my brother's here.
Does anybody know what happened?
I don't know. I think so.
Daniel doesn't know what to do, and so he just flees. He uses the family van to escape and drives away. And I'm not even kidding, he grabs his Halo 3 copy before actually leaving the house. He was that attached to the game. Eventually medics and stuff arrive, and it turns out that their mother was gone forever. But the distant groaning actually came from Mark, who was begging for help. He survived, barely. Now once she made that call, the police took action and actually arrested Daniel during his attempt to escape to a friend's house. And while being arrested, he actually tries to blame all of this on his dad, saying that he did this terrible crime. Mark is rushed to the hospital and they do everything to save his life, but he slips into a coma. Daniel was brought into the police station, and during the interrogation, he actually makes a new plan in his head. Just blame everything on Dad, and I'll be fine. He tells the police that Mark was screaming and yelling at his mom, and he makes up this scenario while crying or at least pretending to do so. He goes on and says that he heard his dad go into the bedroom and back out, and then suddenly heard a loud bang. When he walked out, he saw his dad pointing the device at him before saying, "I'm sorry," and supposedly pointed it at himself. The officers just keep digging and ask questions for hours on end. They ask him stuff like, did anybody touch the device? To see if Daniel had any connection to it. And Daniel responds with, well, yeah, I did. I moved it because I thought Dad would try to injure himself again. Of course, he's saying that since he knows that his fingerprints were on the device. So he just makes up stories on the spot. He explains how he asked his parents if he could go watch a movie with his friends, which led to them even arguing in the first place, which doesn't make any sense. There were so many holes in his story, and as already said, he was trying to pretend like he was crying, but there were literally no tears. And so after hours of the officers pressing him and asking question after question, he folds. He admits that he just kinda snapped and didn't think about what he was doing. And he even says himself that the whole story didn't really make any sense. Mark fortunately eventually wakes up from his coma and confirms the full story by literally just nodding to the questions, since he lost the ability to use most of his body properly. His entire jaw was shattered, for example, but luckily his brain was still intact. As Mark processed all of the information, he understandably started hating his son a lot. He thought about ending him the very next time he would see him, but because Mark was a very religious person, he actually turned to God instead, and after some time, he forgave him. Weeks go by, and he would actually get 5 major surgeries that would reconstruct his eye socket, the roof of his mouth, and also his jaw. And once he was back on his feet, more or less, he would visit Daniel during his trial every single week to actually listen to his side of the story. What were his thoughts during all of this? What was he feeling? And Mark genuinely felt like Daniel was sorry and realized what he had done. And even though his own son ruined Mark's life, he ends up telling the judge that he wants his son to have a second chance at his own life and asks for a lenient sentence for Daniel. Daniel himself actually shows regret and remorse. He takes full accountability and says multiple times that he misses mom and didn't know why he did all of this, but that he was happy that his dad actually survived and that he will never be able to forgive himself for all of these things. But you can't change the past, unfortunately. The action has been done, and so they end up convicting him of unaggravated unaliving, aggravated unaliving, as well as tampering with evidence. But at least due to his age, he would not be sentenced to. The judge sentenced him to life in prison instead, with the possibility of parole after 23 years, which is actually the minimum sentence for this case. The harshest would have been life with no chance of parole at all. Now the interesting thing is that the prosecutors actually blamed Halo 3 a lot, saying that the repeated shooting of virtual aliens essentially trained Daniel to do all of these things. And a lot of media outlets also blamed Halo. But again, this was 2007. A lot of time has passed since this case. This last story is, in my opinion, the most insane one, since it literally is about 2 girls worshipping Slenderman and doing unholy things to their friend. Hayden was born on February 13, 2002. She lived with both of her parents and she had a pretty normal childhood. Loving family, no big struggles. Until about the 4th grade. That was the start of a nightmare for her. She's around 9 or 10 when she approaches a girl who's just kinda sitting alone. Morgan, and they hit it off. Now, in contrast to Peyton's quite normal upbringing, so far at least, Morgan went through some tough times, even at this young age. Her father suffered from severe schizophrenia and was hospitalized multiple times throughout her life, which was obviously very hard for Morgan and her family. Her mother was always busy, and so Morgan just kinda had to entertain herself. And like many people at that age, she did so by going on the internet. And eventually she would somehow stumble across a lot of scary stories, scary pictures, and creepypasta, which were definitely not appropriate for a girl that is like 9 or 10. But Morgan would find these things so interesting for some reason, and she would read stories and look at these pictures for hours. And so when she would go to school, she would tell all the other kids about her findings. Her classmates didn't share the same level of intrigue though. They were actually really afraid of her stories, which led to them distancing themselves from her, which slowly made her an outcast. Peyton didn't care about that though, and although they were very different, they still understood each other, and they became best friends almost immediately. And they do the typical thing young children do. They hang out after school, have sleepovers, and just play together. Nothing out of the ordinary, so far. Except one thing, Morgan keeps telling Peyton about these scary stories. Not all the time, but she would talk about them at night during their sleepovers, for example. And she would also show Morgan a lot of her drawings that, who would have guessed, were also very creepy and disturbing. Peyton pretended like she didn't mind them, but inside she was very creeped out. And they would also be a major hint of what was to come. 2 years pass, and Morgan and Peyton are absolutely inseparable. But Morgan actually makes a second friend, Anissa. And so the duo turns somewhat into a trio of friendship. Anissa was a new addition to the group, but she actually shared a lot in common with Morgan. Or rather, she had one big thing in common: their interest in horror, whether it was photos, stories, or games. And so during one of their talks, Anissa introduces her to the Creepypasta Forum, a fanfiction horror website. And they come across the story of Slenderman. As you might know, Slenderman is this very tall, white creature with very long arms and no face. His thing, according to these creepypasta stories, is that he stalks and abducts people, especially smaller people. And there's also this thing called Slenderman sickness, where people who encounter him essentially develop these symptoms, such as paranoia and hallucinations. And they become his servants, you could say, and help him abduct and hurt other people too. Obviously, Slenderman is not real, but nonetheless, the story of him completely blew up. And so they made a game about him as well in 2012 called Slender, the 8 pages. Morgan and Anissa become completely obsessed with the story and talk about Slenderman all the time now. And Peyton, who's also there, has to hear about him during sleepovers and stuff. And she doesn't like it one bit. Peyton is extremely scared of this urban legend and even ran to her mother once because she was so afraid of him. But Morgan and Anissa just keep looking up facts about him, and their parents eventually notice that too. But they don't think it's a big deal. It's just a scary made-up story after all. Well, what they don't know is that both Morgan and Anissa don't realize that Slenderman doesn't actually exist. They genuinely believe that Slenderman is a creature in the woods who takes people into his domain. And this goes on for a while. Morgan and Anissa talk about this tall man, and Peyton kind of becomes the third wheel, since she doesn't share the same interests, but still kinda tags along, since they've been friends for so long now. May 30th, 2014, and Morgan celebrates her 12th birthday with a sleepover, and she of course invites her 2 best friends, Anissa and Peyton. Everything goes well. They go ice skating, have a great time, and then go get ice cream. And after a while, it's time to start the actual sleepover, so they head to Morgan's home. Now the 3 have done a ton of sleepovers, and normally they watch a movie, play with dolls, and don't actually sleep until the next day. But this sleepover is different. The moment they step into the apartment, Morgan suggests going to sleep almost immediately. No movie, no staying up. Peyton thinks that it's kind of weird that during her birthday of all days, she wants to end the night as soon as possible. But Morgan might have drained all of her energy during the ice skating, and is just tired. And so the 3 actually go to bed. The next day, Peyton slowly wakes up. It's bright outside, and she looks around. But Morgan and Anissa are gone. Peyton walks around the apartment, and eventually finds them looking at something on the computer. Probably some Slenderman stuff, but again, she doesn't really want to know. and they explain that they woke up early and didn't want to disturb her sleep, but they don't mention what they've been looking at on the internet. The three get breakfast, and it starts becoming a normal birthday again for Peyton. Morgan then suggests going to the park to hang out and play. All of them agree, and so they go. Once they're dropped off by Morgan's mom, they first go to the bathroom together. They're just singing, having fun, when Anissa suddenly tries to attack Peyton. She genuinely tries to fight her out of nowhere, but it's unsuccessful, and Peyton is just left extremely confused about what just happened. It's really awkward for a while, but Peyton decides to stay with them since she didn't really understand what was going on. Was it just a bad attempt at a prank? Nonetheless, they head to the woods. They go a bit deeper when Morgan suggests playing hide and seek. She was gonna count and Anissa and Peyton could hide. And so the game begins. Morgan turns around, covers her eyes, and Anissa and Peyton run away. This is where things go south. Anissa actually runs up to Peyton and tells her that she has an idea for a really good hiding spot. Peyton should just lay down and Anissa would cover her with all the leaves and sticks, so Morgan wouldn't be able to see her. Peyton thinks it's a good idea, and so she lays down. Anissa covers her and then she runs away. Morgan eventually starts seeking, and it's all fun and games, when suddenly Anissa runs up to Peyton and pushes her to the ground. Peyton doesn't know what's happening. Was this some sort of sick prank again? She tries to get up, but is still restricted by Anissa, and suddenly Morgan grabs her backpack and pulls out a pointy stick. With that in hand, she approaches Peyton. She leans down to her and just whispers, "I'm so sorry," before her 19 times. They then run off and Peyton is all alone, but she's not ready to leave this earth yet. And so with all her might, she stands up, walks through the woods until she reaches a path in the park and collapses. She was still alive and responsive, but just didn't have the energy to go on. Fortunately, a cyclist was just passing by at that moment, and she mustered up all the energy she had left and tells him what happened. The man then calls the police and an ambulance. She's rushed to the hospital and examined, and it turns out that she has to go through emergency surgery, since 2 of the wounds could end up if not treated immediately. Now, where did Morgan and Anissa run off to during all of this? The police actually arrested them 5 hours after the incident, around 5 miles from the location. And when asked what they were doing, they said that they were going to meet Slender Man at his home, called the Slender Mansion, in the Nicolet National Forest. That was 200 miles away from their location. Both of them are taken to the police station, and they admit to everything immediately. They tell the police that they did this as a way to sacrifice her to Slender Man, because if they did that, Slender Man would spare them. They were actually afraid that this tall monster might do something to their families or themselves, so sacrificing somebody would be the only way to be safe. And so they made this plan months in advance. The reason why Morgan suggested going to sleep so early was so they could attack Peyton in her sleep, but they ended up not being able to go through with it. Then in the bathroom, but didn't go through with it either. And then in the woods, where they actually did it. But it doesn't end here. It doesn't just end with 2 very disturbing and frightened kids who didn't know any better. During the interrogation, Morgan was left alone for a bit, and she decided to literally stand up, walk around and dance, like it was something so normal to her. The police go to seize all of their laptops and notebooks and stuff, and Anissa doesn't really have anything suspicious, you could say. But Morgan's notebook and search history is something else. She had so many drawings of Slender Man with written captions like, "Never alone, he still sees you, he cannot be harmed," and those were just a few examples. And well, there's actually a reason for her disturbing side. Morgan wasn't just obsessed with Slender Man, but she actually saw him. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, just like her father, and the majority of her hallucinations were actually Slender Man, ghosts, and stuff like that. Anissa was diagnosed with mental illnesses too, and these stories, videos, and games just fueled all of this. The case was pretty clear, since they both confessed and the police had all the evidence they needed. But the interesting thing is, they ended up being tried as adults instead of children, because of the severity of their actions. And so Morgan ended up being sentenced to 40 years in a psychiatric unit, and Anissa to 25. Peyton fortunately recovered physically, but was mentally scarred for years after. In an interview, for example, she said that she slept with scissors under her bed for quite some time because she was so scared. Now, Anissa was actually released after almost 4 years in 2021 because she was able to recover from a mental illness, or at least get a lot better, and submitted a letter to the court that said stuff like, "Sorry and deeply regretful for the agony, pain and fear I've caused. I hate my actions from May 31st, 2014, but through countless hours of therapy, I no longer hate myself for them." In 2024, Morgan also asked to be freed, but a judge ultimately denied that request. And this is where it all ends. If you want to hear about more disturbing cases, you can watch this video next.